for 10 years, there would have been significant steps that would have been taken by the two sides. But because Trump pulled out of it, of course, that process stopped. Trump doesn't seem to like that approach because it is taking too long. He wants a fast deal, just a couple of bullet points, a couple of principles, and then they can work out the details afterwards. That's usually not the way the Iranians operate, but it seems to me that the Iranians are now adjusting to the manner that Trump is used to making deals. But again, none of this will work if both sides have completely unrealistic expectations of what they can get out of this negotiation.
And no clear sort of laid out goal, too. And when you look at the exactly where both countries stand, do you think that they both essentially have initiative to let things further escalate? I mean, would it be in their interest to not follow the road to diplomacy?
I think it will be an absolutely lose-lose situation if this escalates into war. It will be clearly a lose situation for the Iranians. The US's military power, of course, is overwhelming. But it will also be a lose situation for the United States because the Iranians still have significant capability of inflicting damage on the US, on the oil markets, on regional stability, as well as US soft targets throughout the region and perhaps beyond. There's nothing good that will come out of this. I think it also will be a lose situation for the Iranian people who, as you pointed out, are still out there protesting. They're still angry, and as they should be, about the killings that have taken place there by the brutality of the Iranian government over the course of the last couple of weeks, but also over the course of the last couple of years and decades. Nothing good will come out of that. So it's crucial that there is a de-escalation. And there's one card the Iranians have not played yet, which I think is a mistake. They should be open to talking directly to Trump himself, not just to his negotiators. This needs much bigger efforts at de-escalation. And the Iranians have, in my view, very foolishly rejected that opportunity, that pathway. And I think Trump would have, I don't think we would have seen the escalation we have seen thus far had the Iranians agreed to do this much earlier.
Tonight, Iran's foreign minister responding on X, writing, it is, quote, curious as to why we do not capitulate because we are Iranian. We're joined now by former State Department Middle East negotiator Aaron David Miller. He's now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron, thanks for being here. This is a very interesting time in all of this, the next several days. Many administrations, Democratic and Republican, have tried diplomacy with Iran. How are you reading where we stand tonight?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jess. Look, there are no good options with Iran. There are no good negotiating options. The president is not going to get what he wants. The Iranians are not going to break with their proxies, fundamentally restrict their ballistic missiles, or give up completely the right to enrich, not with this brutal, repressive regime. And there are no good military options. And I think the president's frustration reflects the fact that we're on the cusp of what could be a major regional war, and we seem to be sleepwalking into it without a clear set of objectives of what it is we want to achieve. And that's risky business, right? I mean, if you don't define what it is you want, and obviously the first shot, the enemy has a vote, wars evolve, strategies change. But if you don't define your objectives, then reality defines them for you. And frankly, we've had no presentation by the administration of exactly what it intends to do. What are the costs? What are the risks? And I think the president is toggling. One day we're going to, We're going to basically hit them so they come to the negotiating table. And in the months to come, we're going to hit them harder. I mean, that's just not a strategy. It's frustrating, I understand, because this regime, frankly, it's almost impossible for America, for the United States to get what it wants, either at the negotiating table or on the battlefield.
Yeah. And how much do you think the current situation, what's evolved and happened over the last 2 years, and the severe weakening of Iran and its proxies, how does that factor into this on both sides?
I mean, in a way, you would argue. I mean, Steve Witkoff talks about capitulation, and when have the Iranians ever capitulated? Even the Iranian nuclear agreement came at a cost. We conceded the right for the Iranians to enrich uranium on Iranian soil. So the Iranians don't capitulate. 40 plus years since the revolution should suggest that is in fact the case. And frankly, I really don't know where the administration is going. The weakness implies that the Iranians are vulnerable and they should be willing to cut some sort of deal on terms that the administration could accept. But the weakness argument plays the other way too. The Iranians are desperate, could be desperate, and if they see this as an existential sort of struggle, they're going to respond. And that, I guess, just that's the other thing. What do they do in the event that the administration hits them hard or relatively not hard at all? There's strikes against the Israelis, there's strikes against economic infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, or strikes against American forces at our bases in the Gulf. So again, risky business without a clear end state, I think, articulated as of yet on the part of the administration.
Yeah, and that was kind of something we were discussing with a guest earlier in the show, which is, okay, if you do a limited strike and that still doesn't get them to where you want them to be, you being the Trump administration, then is your hand now forced with this massive military buildup to go in hard? You know, are you now kind of backed into a corner to have to go in harder?
I mean, I listened to Wes Clark was on the way. We're going to hit them hard. Is it to fracture the regime? Is it to drop special ops guys on the ground in an effort to undermine their ballistic missile production or their nuclear sites? Is there an option on the table to identify where the senior leadership is, where an 86-year-old supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is, and to what? Do Maduro? Again, if you don't define the objectives, then others define them for you, or reality defines them for you. If we want to change the regime, I think there's a way to do it, but it's completely unrealistic. It's Iraq. You want to deploy hundreds of thousands of American forces, occupy a country of roughly 90 million people, and hope you could somehow manufacture and orchestrate a different regime. And even if the regime fractured, and again, I'll say it again, a brutal, repressive regime whose time has clearly come. Look at the Iranian public, and as the death toll mounts from the first week in January, the question is, how do you effectively either negotiate, if that's what the president wants to do, or use military force to undermine the regime, to weaken it over time? Again, I don't think there's a clear set of objectives here.
It's about, you and to a person, everyone says it's about defining your objectives, knowing what you're trying to accomplish. Aaron, Iran's foreign minister says further nuclear talks with the U.S. could happen as soon as Thursday. On the U.S. side, those talks are being led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And today, he said President Trump was, in his words, curious as to why Iran had not, quote, capitulated to military pressure. Over the last several weeks, the U.S. has amassed the largest buildup of American forces in the Middle East since the Iraq War. And we're joined now by former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wesley Clark. General Clark, great to have you here on this Sunday evening. We have this massive buildup of forces at the ready while these diplomatic talks continue, but their scope kind of remains exactly unclear. Where do you see this all going?
I see us possibly doing a limited strike early in the week, depending on how we're looking at the potential negotiations that might occur on Thursday. And the idea would be a strike, pause, wait for negotiations, put more pressure on, strike again, and see if we can't squeeze the Iranian regime into concessions that go beyond the 2015 agreement that President Obama got. And as you know, the American position is we want a halt to the nuclear processing. We want, or enrichment. We want a halt to the ballistic developments that could threaten the region, and we want an end to the axis of resistance that's out there. Those are three big asks of the Iranians. And if they were all conceded to, Iran would be stripped of what it considers its defense and deterrence. So this is a big ask, and Iran may see itself as actually being in a stronger position. It may believe that it can see, like a turtle, pull its head in, get in the shell, wait for the inevitable attacks, wait them out. I know they're watching very closely the U.S. political system. They know what MAGA believes and what they said after the last strikes in June. So we have a really complicated situation here, Jessica.
Yeah, and so to that end, does it then force the president, again, you've got all of this military buildup there. If, let's say, that option is used, which is this more targeted military strike to try to get the Iranians to agree to what the president and his administration are asking for. If they don't do that, would it then potentially force the president to continue with military action?
I think that's what the Iranians are hoping for. I think they're hoping that they can absorb the first strike, absorb the second strike, not give up much, and that the United States will eventually just run out of energy or run out of political will to continue the strikes. I think they're making a mistake in that because so many of us believe that Iran having a nuclear weapon is really an existential threat, not only to Israel, but to the region and ultimately to the United States. So I think the Iranian leadership may be misunderstanding the broader support for this action in the United States.
And we've used some superlatives trying to explain to people how large this military buildup is. But can you help contextualize what we're seeing based on your experience?
Well, it's a full scramble, and so you have the two aircraft carriers. So you have off those aircraft carriers, maybe 180 aircraft. Then you have several other squadrons of fighters. You have the availability of the B-2s that can deploy. We had 7 that deployed in June. We could put more B-2s in there at this point. You have the tanker fleet there to support them. You have airborne command and control and the AWACS system to support continuous presence overhead. Still, it's a big country, and you have probably a limited number of special operations forces. They could go in, they could be inserted on top of a suspected Iranian nuclear site. They could blow open the doors, let's say. They could hold a limited perimeter for a period of time and be supported by the forces that are there. So it is something that we haven't seen before. This scale of buildup, it's large, it's big, and don't forget, Israel probably would be engaged in this also. So they've got another several hundred attack aircraft that could be deployed against Iran with appropriate air-to-air refueling.
Iran and potential military action in Iran. The Trump administration, of course, has amassed this largest buildup of American forces in the Middle East since the Iraq War. I'm curious if you support the president taking military action, and if so, do you think he needs congressional approval?
Well, it really depends, when you look at whether something requires an authorization for use of military force or some sort of declaration of war, it tends to be very context dependent. And, you've seen in modern history, when you take sort of limited actions, that does fall within sort of the inherent authority of the president. And that's what makes this different than, say, tariff policy or other aspects of economic policy, is there's a much broader swath of inherent constitutional authority that exists there, and for good reason, because when you're dealing with a very dynamic, volatile situation like they have in Iran, where there's an ongoing negotiation, but then there's also potentially the need to, act in a kinetic way as well. You can't necessarily have, Congress weighing in on each and every aspect of that process. Now, of course, in the long term, if there's going to be any sort of long-term engagement, Congress needs to be centrally involved. But the president, I think we need to acknowledge in these situations, does have, whoever the president is, does have a large swath of inherent constitutional authority.
All right, Congressman Kevin.
Iranian leaders, they are facing new protests just weeks after brutally suppressing the largest anti-regime rallies in years. Videos posted by human rights groups showing demonstrations at multiple universities in Iran. The protests, they coincide with the end of a traditional mourning period after thousands of protesters were killed there last month. And all of this comes as the U.S. ramps up its military buildup near Iran and amid threats of strikes over Iran's nuclear program. But in a new statement, Iran's president says that Tehran is not caving in. And in Iran, they held talks in Geneva last week. And Iran's top diplomat said on Friday that Tehran could have its proposal for ending the crisis ready within days. But Iran has made it clear that it would retaliate if the U.S. goes ahead with any strikes. Tehran is believed to have thousands of drones and missiles that have Israel and the U.S. troops within their range. One expert says that those launch sites could be on the top of the U.S. target list.
I think military planners will want to, in the first wave of strikes, target the missiles, the missile launchers in particular, which is a key resource that you have to try to take out, because that degrades and deters Iran's ability to respond to any attack. Then I think U.S. military planners will want to probably restrike some of the Iranian nuclear targets that might be left. And there's actually a new facility. There's a facility buried into a mountain south of Natanz, which was an enrichment center that Iran declared in 2020 that would be a centrifuge manufacturing facility. That is under construction. That might be on the target list. But then finally, and this gets back to what precipitated this crisis, given President Trump's warnings and given the scale of the crackdown, I would suspect the U.S. would also strike targets related to the repressive apparatus of the Iranian regime, the Revolutionary Guards Corps, the besieged militia. So then you're talking about a fairly significant operation that is going to last some time, days if not weeks, and that seems to be right now where this is heading.
The protests coincide with the end of a traditional mourning period after thousands of protesters were killed last month. All of this comes as the US ramps up its military buildup near Iran, amid threats of strikes over Iran's nuclear program. But in a new statement, Iran's president says Tehran is not giving in. Iran held talks in Geneva last week, and Iran's top diplomat said on Friday, Tehran could have its proposal for ending the crisis ready within days. The US ambassador to Israel is facing backlash over his latest comments from Arab and Muslim-majority countries. Mike Huckabee was asked by conservative commentator Tucker Carlson about what land belongs to the Jewish people, according to the Bible. Huckabee said he'd be fine with Israel taking over much of the Middle East. Huckabee added that Israel is not trying to take land from countries like Iraq, Syria, or Jordan. But even nominal support for Israeli sovereignty in much of the Middle East would be a sharp U-turn from current US foreign policy. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation slammed Huckabee's statement, saying it's an unacceptable call for the expansion of Israel and the seizure of more Palestinian and Arab lands.
New today, the U.S. military said 3 people were killed in a strike on an alleged drug smuggling boat in the eastern Pacific Ocean. U.S. Southern Command said in a statement the vessel was operated by, quote, designated terrorist organizations. For perspective, at least 138 people have now been killed in strikes on boats with which the Trump administration says are aimed at curtailing narcotics trafficking. Also new today, Iran's president sounding a defiant tone even as President Trump weighs a potential attack. In a speech on state TV, Masoud Pezeshkian said world powers are lining up to force us to bow our heads, but we will not bow our heads. Just yesterday, Iran's foreign minister and head negotiator told MS Now that a deal can be reached, and he expected to send a proposal to U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff in the next few days. Here's what President Trump said this week about his own timeline.
Well, we're going to make a deal, or we're going to get a deal one way or the other.
But with a military strike, is it to wipe out their nuclear program?
I'm not going to talk to you about that, but we're either going to get a deal or it's going to be unfortunate for them.
And you said today 10 days. Have you given them a deadline firm to make a deal?
I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days, pretty much maximum.
We've heard similar timelines floated by the president for other types of plans as well. But the U.S. has been massing its forces in the Middle East, and the supercarrier strike group, the USS Gerald Ford, is also now in the Mediterranean. With us now, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Leighton. He is a CNN military analyst. Good to see you. Colonel, so Iran is saying it's getting another proposal ready for the United States. But how do diplomatic efforts weigh against a potential military action? I mean, is the mere possibility of a proposal enough to actually stop something like that?
Well, it really depends on the proposal and the willingness, in this case, of the U.S., Omar, to actually accept that proposal or consider that proposal. So there have been situations in the past where diplomatic activities have actually prevented military action from occurring. And if we remember back a few years ago, when President Trump had a chance to go after Iran in his first term, he chose not to do so at basically the very last second of military action. So there is that possibility, but normally when there is so much firepower in place and when there's a willingness both rhetorically and from a capability standpoint to use that force, we end up using that force to one degree or another. So it really depends on how willing the U.S. is to accept the Iranian proposal, how close the Iranian proposal is to what President Trump has been talking about. That will really decide what happens in the next few days, I think.
And when you look at just the buildup in the Middle East, I mean, we've talked about it, essentially we haven't seen it to this degree in this region in decades to this point. What intelligence is the United States using right now to plot its military options with Iran? And does that differ depending on the strategic objective of which the United States and Iran have had many tensions over the past, let's just call it, few years, to stick with that timeline?
Right. So when it comes to the type of intelligence that's used, the basic collection apparatus that we have in place against Iran is the one that we will use in a situation like this. So that part, the aggregate, the totality, the macro level intelligence doesn't really change, but the details, the types of collection assets that are used in terms of, what specific targets they go after from an intelligence collection perspective, that may change. Because if you, let's say, decide to target a leadership activity, then you will focus your detailed intelligence collection efforts on that leadership activity. And if you decide to target an economic target, you will look at the types of economic targets that you find most vulnerable. So those are the kinds of things that they will be looking at, and they will employ both national technical means, in other words, things like satellites, and they will also employ more tactical level assets, such as human intelligence assets, to get that type of information that they need really for targeting purposes.
And when you look at just the buildup in the region, we had the graphic up just a few moments ago. I think about and contrast sort of the previous recent strike that the United States did on the nuclear facilities in Iran. That was a very targeted, swift attack. Is it your assessment, based on the buildup that we have here, that this is a preparation for another similar targeted strategic attack, or preparing for what may come after a similar type of strike?
Yeah, so one of the key things where there's always a bit of worry when it comes to putting things like this together, military assets like this together, is the what comes next question. So right now, Omar, it looks to me as if this is something where we are preparing, like we did back in June of this past year, for a strike that is basically not quite a one and done type situation, but a strike that is fairly quick and uses those assets in an efficient manner and goes after certain specific targets. The what comes next question is one that will be one that could potentially strain our ability to perform continued military actions. We do have the capacity to perform those actions. What I'm not seeing right now is intensive planning like we had, for example, in the run-up to the second Gulf War, that would allow us to not only have sustained air campaign, but also other types of campaigns, whether they be a land campaign, which is definitely out of the question at this particular point in time, or something more sophisticated like a cyber campaign. None of that has at least been made public at this particular point in time, and it probably won't be, but those are the kinds of planning efforts that would need to take place in order to have a sustained campaign in this case.
The president can either cut a deal to curb Iran's nuclear program or launch a war. The U.S. military continues to deploy ships and aircraft to nearby waters in what appears to be the largest military buildup since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. On Friday, the USS Gerald Ford sailed into the Mediterranean, further escalating tensions as American and Iranian envoys continued to negotiate. Iran preparing a new draft proposal after nuclear talks with the U.S. Iran's foreign minister optimistic about a deal. He told MS Now they're hoping to hand over the proposal to President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, soon. He also said the U.S. has not asked Iran to halt uranium enrichment and that Tehran has not offered to suspend it voluntarily. President Trump warns that he's considering limited strikes on Iran to pressure the country into a deal. He's insisted that Iran cannot obtain a nuclear weapon, but has not said what precisely his objectives would be if he ordered a strike, but gave a stark warning to Iran.
Do you have any message to the Iranian people?
The Iranian people in Iran or people here?
People in Iran.
They better negotiate a fair deal.
Potential attack plans presented to the White House range from quick strikes to more extensive operations that could last weeks. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has blocked a request from President Trump to allow U.S. forces to use UK air bases during any preemptive attack on Iran, saying that it could break international law. As escalations continue, satellite images show that Iran is fortifying several of its nuclear facilities using concrete and large amounts of soil to bury key sites. Joining me now to discuss all this, CNN political and national security analyst David Sanger and senior military analyst and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander Admiral James Stavridis. Admiral, let me begin with you. Tell me about the firepower that we've assembled in the Middle East.
You started with a comparison to 2003. It's also like 1990, Persian Gulf War I. This is a huge amount of U.S. firepower, and let's kind of do it from the outside in, if you will, in concentric rings, descending like Dante's Inferno. On the outer rings are big strategic bombers. They can come all the way from the United States. They can operate from other bases, but at distance. Inside are the two aircraft carriers. One you see there on the screen, it's in the northern part of the Indian Ocean. The other one is going to park right against Israel, where you see the word Syria on that chart. So now you've got two axes. These are 80 combat aircraft each, with F-35s, our most advanced jets, as well as plenty of F/A-18 Hornets. And then you go inside that and you've got the capacity to launch Tomahawk missiles. You can send drones in, you can use cyber, and of course there's land-based aircraft, Air Force aircraft at many of those bases you showed there. So again, think of it like Dante's Inferno descending. Right in the center of it at the very bottom is Ayatollah Khamenei. I agree with President Trump. He would be wise to negotiate.
David Sanger, you've written, rarely in modern times has the United States prepared to conduct a major act of war with so little explanation and so little public debate. Expand on that, please.
Well, Michael, as we've heard from the Admiral, there's a huge amount of firepower out there, but it's not clear toward what end. So the president has really laid out four different objectives at various points. One is halt the nuclear program. It's interesting because he said he had obliterated the major nuclear sites before. The Iranians are not enriching uranium right now, but I agree with the Admiral. This would be a superb moment, backed up by all this gunboat diplomacy, to negotiate something that would be long-lasting. But he's also talked about protecting the protesters. He's talked about making sure that Iran does not support terrorism. It doesn't have very much money to go do so right now, but it certainly has in the past. And of course, he's talked about eliminating those missiles that the Israelis are worried about, conventional missiles that can reach Israel. And he's not given a speech to lay out what his objectives are. He's not answered the question of whether or not he's really seeking regime change. And since we're not going to put troops on the ground, he's been pretty clear about that. If you did topple the regime, there's very little control to make sure that what came in would actually be a democratic state. You know, it could well be the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps taking control. We tried a coup in Iran in 1953, and Iranians, you know, still learn about this in school every day. And there is the possibility that this then has a backlash against the U.S. rather than against the Ayatollah.
Admiral, you're the former Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. What's the role of NATO?
The Israelis bring not only the same kind of conventional capability, precision-guided weapons, F-35s, much of it purchased from us. But they also bring very significant cyber capability. They're among the very best in the world. They have the best special forces in the region. They have incredible intelligence. So I think in terms of allies, it really is Israel. The Europeans are going to kind of lean back from this. I'm disappointed that the British Prime Minister would not evidently allow us to use British facilities. He's talking about Diego Garcia, the island in the Indian Ocean. But believe me, we have all the capability in the world to get this done between ourselves and the Israelis. Final thought, Michael, and picking up David's point of objectives, another way to think of it is, what are the military options the president has? He can go non-kinetic. He can use cyber, directed energy, information warfare. Second option, the one he's talking about, kind of limited, precision-guided strikes, maybe go after leadership, Revolutionary Guard leaders. That would be a campaign of a few days. Number three, he could go big with the forces he's got there. You mentioned 2003. We talk about those campaigns as shock and awe. I don't think we're headed there, but that would be a campaign of some number of weeks to really cripple more or less permanently the Iranian military-industrial complex.
David Sanger, you know the president well. You've covered him extensively. You were part of that New York Times group that spent 3 hours with him in the Oval Office recently. So I put my unusual question to you. Should the Ayatollah be nervous that the administration just lost the tariff battle in the Supreme Court?
Well, you can certainly argue that the president is probably feeling right now the first pushback on his powers that he's felt really in the first year of his presidency. For the first time, the courts have sort of come in a big way and said, this is not within the powers of the presidency unless the tariffs that he had imposed were not legal. And he may well want to push back by showing that he can operate in an area where the Constitution gives him an enormous amount of leeway. But even here, the interesting question is, this would clearly be an act of war. I mean, the way you test it is if somebody massed this kind of force off the United States and threatened to conduct this, we would consider that a potential act of war. And yet Congress has not issued either an authorization to use military force, as they did in the case of Iraq, or passed a war resolution. And, you know, what did the president tell us in that interview? He asked whether there were any limits on his power. He said, really only my own morality. That's the only limit that I have.
Iran is preparing a new draft proposal after nuclear talks with the U.S. Iran's foreign minister is optimistic about a deal. He says the U.S. has not asked Iran to halt uranium enrichment, and Tehran has not offered to suspend it voluntarily. He told MS Now they're hoping to hand over the new proposal to Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, soon.
And I don't think it takes long. Perhaps in a matter of a week or so, we can start real serious negotiations on the text and come to a conclusion.
Meanwhile, the president warns that he's considering limited strikes on Iran to pressure the country into a deal. The USS Gerald Ford carrier strike group is already in the Mediterranean Sea, heading towards the Middle East to join other U.S. military assets in the region. But top Democrats are urging the Trump administration not to take military action without congressional approval. Benham Ben Taleblu, senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, joins us now. Thanks for coming back. Let's take this in bites. First, the optimism you're hearing from Foreign Minister Araghchi, at least on the path to substantive negotiations. I read that you see Iran playing the game it has always played. What do you see here in this optimism?
Well, great to be back with you again. I think we have to pay attention to who the real decision makers are in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that's not the foreign minister. It's actually the supreme leader. That's a title meant to be taken rather literally. And he hasn't been speaking that much since the end of the 12-day war with Israel and America, but he's spoken about maybe 14, 16 times since then, and his most recent speech struck a drastically, and I want to stress that for the audience, drastically different tone than what Araghchi has said both in his Fox interview as well as in his MSNBC interview that you just alluded to. So while Arakshi is injecting a little bit of cautious optimism, I would say the chances of a deal are about 20% and dropping with the Islamic Republic at this rate. Even if, for example, enrichment was not discussed, there's a whole host of other issues that do divide and keep apart the U.S. and Iran, especially at this very tense moment.
And so you say there's a strong contrast between what we're hearing from the Ayatollah and what we're hearing from the foreign minister. What's the most relevant contrast that you hear from the supreme leader?
Well, I don't want to get too into the details. It might sound a bit too theological, but the Supreme Leader of Iran also is an Ayatollah, as you mentioned. And he does reference Islamic political history, and in particular Shiite political history, to justify political moves. For example, when he authorized nuclear negotiations with President Obama back in 2013, under the auspices of the P5+1, he talked about Imam Hassan, and he talked about heroic flexibility, needing to show flexibility with your opponents. And that paved the pathway for the 2015 JCPOA deal. But here he's been talking about Imam Hussein, whose epithet, the master of martyrs, kind of tells you all you need to know about the direction the Islamic Republic is headed in. And it's quite rare also internally to have military, political, and religious elites sing from the same sheet of music. And the same sheet of music is that if there's a strike, no matter how limited, Iran will respond in a massive way.
And so you mentioned the JCPOA that President Trump ended in his first term in 2018. And I just want to read a bit of what we learned from that interview from the foreign minister. We've not offered any suspension, and the U.S. side has not asked for zero enrichment. What we are now talking about is how to make sure that Iran's nuclear program, including enrichment, is peaceful and will remain peaceful forever, which would be too similar to the JCPOA, that it would be a complete contrast to what we're hearing from President Trump publicly. Is that credible at all, that continuing an enrichment program is part of the conversation?
Well, certainly the challenge for the Islamic Republic right now is how to transpose the reality that they're currently not enriching since the end of the 12-day war into something that looks like it's a concession for the United States of America. And that's precisely why America can ask for bigger things, more challenging things, because it's actually taken away enrichment from the Islamic Republic. It's taken away the capacity. It hasn't taken away the capability, aka the know-how, but nonetheless, Iran is not currently enriching today. So the Islamic Republic has decreasingly been able to actually threaten to restore enrichment or anything else like that. And therefore, it's trying to find a way to make Trump pay what he previously got for free. And that gets at the heart of the matter of enrichment in this agreement.
Yeah. The USS Gerald Ford, that carrier strike group, is in the Mediterranean. Of course, the Abraham Lincoln has been there for some time. You've said that the chance of a deal is 20% and dropping. So we know what you believe about the potential for a military strike. What are the indicators from Iran that they believe that a military strike is coming?
Well, it's actually very interesting that both America and Iran continue to talk about being interested in negotiations, but also continue to do things physically that tell you that they're getting ready for a strike. The Islamic Republic, for example, continues to build back better when it comes to its ballistic missile program. We know that that's really the spinal cord of its deterrence at this point in time. It's the long pole of the regime's security strategy. And then most importantly, it seems to be hardening some nuclear sites. So in the case that there's a strike that is not just against missile facilities, but actually against what's left of the nuclear program, particularly a plant that is believed to be a future enrichment facility or previous research and development labs. Those things, per commercial satellite imagery, are being hardened. So when you take its tough rhetoric on missiles and then you look at this kind of hardening and dispersal, it looks like both sides are getting ready for exit options from negotiation.
We have breaking news. President Trump sending a new warning to Iran as he weighs a range of military strikes that could come as soon as this weekend.
They better negotiate a fair deal.
As Trump is pressuring Iran to make a nuclear deal, the largest U.S. military buildup in the Middle East in 22 years is on the verge of getting even bigger. The USS Gerald Ford Carrier Strike Group entered the Mediterranean Sea today, putting it closer to striking distance inside of Iran. Out front now, Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean. She is a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. Congresswoman Dean, is a U.S. military strike on Iran imminent, in your opinion?
I hope not. I truly hope not. Good to be with you, Brianna. And this is not a quiet Friday. And it is not a quiet Friday if you consider the implications from the United States Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 talks about war powers, and the war powers rest within Congress. I'm very worried about the buildup around Iran, the language of our president that is not diplomatic, that is not seeking answers through diplomacy, sanctions, and the required Secretary of State engagement. So I'm very worried about that. Maybe you have seen the joint statement from the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Intelligence, and Armed Services Committees. I serve on Appropriations and Foreign Affairs. And the warning is that we strongly, and I join this statement, we strongly oppose preemptive strikes in Iran, that we must focus on diplomacy first, that we must focus on sanctions, and the Constitution is clear. War powers lie within the American people, within Congress, number one, under Article 1. But also the president needs to make the case to the American people. None of that has happened.
I do want to ask you, because during the last strike on Iran, there were Democrats, not many of them, just a couple, but they supported what President Trump did. And then you had a number of other Democrats who supported the policy, but they didn't support how it was done. They also had the war powers objections that you are raising. But knowing that, I mean, is there a possibility with this strike that it could achieve something that actually a number of Democrats might be satisfied with?
The greater risk is the risk to American lives. Look at the massive buildup of military might in the region. The risk is to American lives. Are we supposed to, without any justification from the president, without any coming to Congress, say, sure, put military lives, U.S. military lives at risk of being injured, of losing them? I can't justify that. And the president clearly can't justify that. What dismays me is the failure of the president to adequately use his Department of State. Where is Secretary Rubio in all of this? Why are we always talking about Jared Kushner and Mr. Witkoff? I just returned Wednesday morning from Israel. Again, it is all about others talking about diplomacy or trying to figure out peace and pushing forward in terms of the 20-point plan between Gaza, Palestinian and Israeli peace. Why not go with true diplomacy? Not deal makers, not people who see this as a corporate extension of themselves. Let's go with diplomacy. Let's go with the Constitution. Let's go with advising the American people and asking for the consent of Congress.
Is it clear to you what the objective is here? Is there clarity on that? Because the White House has given several reasons for the attack: to stop Iran's nuclear weapons program, to retaliate after the regime reportedly killed thousands of protesters here recently, to destroy Iran's ballistic missile program, to end Iran's support of proxy forces in the region. Do you have clarity on the objective?
No, we don't. And obviously, and I think you just listed many objectives very, very well. And what we need are the facts and the truth. What the president has said he is upset about, and I share this upset, is the killing of protesters in Iran. He said he was going to be locked and loaded around that issue. And then, of course, Iran says that, no, it's not 30,000 protesters, it's 3,100 protesters. None of that is good. Iran is a bad actor. We know that. But the president needs to do this not in an erratic way and to identify his mission. Is it about the nuclear program? We have an interest in making sure that Iran does not enrich uranium and develop nuclear weapons. That needs to be absolutely defined and focused. Unfortunately, the president has walked away from that kind of oversight and is not being clear on actually what he is interested in. Is he interested in protecting some sort of an attempt at democracy and protecting protesters who are being slaughtered? It doesn't seem that way. Is this about oil? I don't know. What is the president interested in? The erratic nature that we see. He did a buildup in the area of Venezuela. He went after Greenland in a very absurd way, and now Iran. And all of this, as I said, I just returned from Israel. We don't want to provoke a kinetic war in Iran, in the region, without an understanding of exactly what the mission is and exactly what our partners believe is the best issue.
Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thank you very much for being with us on such a big day as we see these a lot of this military material mobilizing. Thank you. And now I do want to bring in retired Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. General Kimmitt, if the U.S. does move forward with a military operation in Iran, do you think there is a likelihood that it could escalate into something much larger in the region, or do you think there's a way to keep it limited?
No, I think that there's a very good chance that the Iranians will respond in a greater way than they did last June. They have threatened it, and one thing that we do know about the Iranians is they usually live up to their promises.
And so what would that look like, in your opinion?
I think it'd be twofold. First of all, we've already got groups, their proxies, talking about responding if Iran is attacked. Hezbollah has claimed it will respond. So number one, the proxies. Number two, they really didn't launch their significant amount of ballistic missiles and rockets that they have in the June operation. I would expect that if we or our allies couldn't take out those ballistic missile sites, that there would be a pretty large launching of those against not only the Israelis, but against U.S. bases in the region.
Talk to us a little bit about the range of options the military has here when we're looking at what's in the area. The Forward Carrier Strike Group entered the Mediterranean Sea today as it's moving within striking distance of Iran. It's going to be the second carrier strike group in the region. That includes other combat ships, it includes fighter jets. And that's also in addition to the attack and surveillance air.
Which it looks like we're prepared to do, could also include military headquarters, IRGC, Quds Force headquarters, the security forces. And that operation might not simply be air operations. It will certainly include naval operations. The Iranians are not going to let our ships in the Persian Gulf go unprotected or unattacked. And I think there might even be some special operations against key IRGC and Basij leadership that killed those 3,100 protesters that were talked about earlier.
Breaking news tonight as the U.S. amasses military assets in the Middle East. The world's largest aircraft carrier was spotted entering the Mediterranean Sea earlier today. It's the USS Gerald R. Ford. You see it there, the right on your screen. Well, President Trump gave a 10 to 15-day time frame for Iran to make a nuclear deal. Today, when asked by a reporter if he's considering a more limited military strike to pressure them into a deal, here's how he answered.
I guess I can say I am considering it. Who is that person? Are you considering a military strike? Yes.
Well, the map gives you an idea of just the sheer volume, the amount of U.S. forces in the region. It includes fighter jets, refueling tankers, nearly a dozen U.S. Navy ships, including another aircraft carrier, the USS Lincoln. It is the largest buildup in the Middle East in 22 years. We reported yesterday that Mr. Trump is still weighing his options for military action, ranging from more limited, targeted strikes to sustained operations that could last weeks. I'm joined now by Democratic Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander of New Hampshire. She's a member of the Armed Services Committee and is a former intelligence officer in the Naval Reserve. Congresswoman, thanks for being here. How do you interpret the president's latest comments on Iran, the massive U.S. military buildup in the Middle East? Where do you see things headed?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Anderson. You know, today of all days, the president should be mindful of what the Constitution says about his powers and about the powers of Congress. The Supreme Court reminded him today that he does not have boundless power to tax the American people and small businesses. He does not have boundless power to wage war. And if the president has clear military objectives in Iran, if there is an imminent threat to the United States or our allies, the president should come to Congress, he should make his case, he should get our authorization before he takes action. It was just a few months ago that the president took unilateral, unauthorized military action in Iran, and he told the American people and the world that it was a resounding success, that he had totally obliterated Iran's nuclear sites, key nuclear sites. So it's, as I sit here now, Anderson, it's hard for me to understand what the president's objectives are here. And it's an important day for him to remember that under the Constitution, Congress has the power to declare war, and he needs our authorization to take action.
Do you have any sense of what the, I mean, if there is to be a military action, whether he consults Congress or not, what the objective would be? Because, I mean, he had told protesters who were, being killed in the streets, being hunted down in hospitals, imprisoned, tortured, killed, to keep protesting, to take over government buildings if they could, that help was on the way. So that seems to indicate some sort of regime change objective, but doing that from the air is obviously, I'm not sure how feasible that actually is. So is it to, if it's not regime change, is it to pressure the regime to, make a nuclear deal?
Anderson, I don't know what the president's objectives are, because he has not been clear with the Congress or with the American people about what his objectives are. I believe that we have in the Iranian regime and the supreme leader a brutal and determined enemy of the United States. I believe there's strong bipartisan support in the Congress to supporting action-scale military attacks that led to regime change in Venezuela. Well, how's that going? What happened there? He replaced one thug with another, and this is not what the American people need right now. The people I represent, the people of New Hampshire, are feeling a whole lot of pain right now. The pain of a genuine affordability crisis. The president needs to be clear about his objectives, and he needs to follow the Constitution, and he should remember that today of all days.
Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, thank you very much.
Represents San Diego County in the U.S. House of Representatives. Of course, San Diego, America's finest city, as they like to say there. Sarah Jacobs, welcome to Story Is for the first time.
Thank you.
You are on the Foreign Affairs Committee and the Armed Services Committee, so this Iran thing is right in your wheelhouse. What do you want to see happen there?
Well, look, first of all, I think the idea that we're even in this position where we're talking about military strikes to try and compel Iran into a worse deal than the deal that Donald Trump pulled us out of is ridiculous. And there's no congressional authorization, not to mention that, whatever he does, is it regime change? Is it something else? Like, there's no day after plan. And frankly, we tried regime change in Iran before. It didn't go very well.
So what do you want to see happen?
Yes. What I would like to see is diplomacy, and what I would like to see is a real effort to try and use the diplomatic track to get to a solution without all of this fear-mongering and all of the money being spent sending so much of U.S. military to the region.
Critics would say, look, Iran, their leadership, bad dudes. Look at the way they just handled the protesters, literally murdering people in the streets, that this regime has had years of problems. And so why should we trust them when clearly they've lied to us so many times in the past?
Well, I'm not saying we should trust them. But let's also be clear, there are a lot of bad people who run countries all over the world, right? I'm the ranking member on the subcommittee on Africa. There are a lot of bad dudes who run countries.
Yeah.
We should not be in the business of militarily taking them out. That is not the right solution.
Is there any appetite in Congress to actually push back on some of this in terms of congressional authorization? And are there any Republicans willing to go on that issue with you?
Well, I think there is, right? In the House, we have the Massey bill on war powers saying that the president does not have authorization to use military action against Iran that I think will be coming up for a vote this next week when we're back. The Senate has a similar one with Rand Paul and Tim Kaine. So, I know a lot of my Republican colleagues privately tell me they know it's not a good idea, and I'm hopeful that when the vote comes, they will vote that way.
President Trump is extending his timeline for making a decision on whether to attack Iran, saying it will be another 10 to 15 days. He has already ordered the largest military buildup in the Middle East in 22 years. Sources tell CNN the U.S. could be ready to strike Iran as early as this weekend, although officials did not expect an attack to happen that soon. CNN's Kristen Holmes has more from Washington.
And now he said 10 to 15 days. That was just hours after he had said 10 days. So clearly there is a shifting timeline. And really this kind of ambiguity or vagueness is something that we are hearing is happening behind the scenes as well. I talked to a number of advisors who seemed to not know how to communicate or did not know why exactly it was in America's best interest to get involved now in some kind of military intervention in Iran and how to communicate that to the people. Remember, there are still a number of questions here as to what exactly the United States is hoping to achieve if they are going to, in fact, strike Iran. Is this going to be a targeting of top leadership? Is this a targeting of enrichment capabilities or ballistic missile facilities? We do not have those answers from the White House or from the administration. And if it is to be some kind of regime change that the United States is hoping for, it is unclear that the United States or the administration has a plan as to what exactly that would look like on day 2 after these strikes. Right now, the White House has not really sold to the American public why there might be this heightened sense of needing or urgency to go into Iran. But we do know President Trump has not yet made up his mind. He is weighing these various military interventions as well as this idea of trying to reach some kind of diplomatic solution. Kristen Holmes, CNN, the White House.
US President Trump is facing perhaps one of the most important decisions of his second term, and that's what actions, if any, to take against Iran over its nuclear program. The president is extending his timeline for making a decision on Iran, saying it could be another 10 to 15 days. Any possible attack could range from limited strikes to larger operations, potentially over weeks, to targeting Iran's leaders and regime change. This all comes as President Trump has ordered the largest military buildup in the Middle East in 22 years. Sources tell CNN the U.S. could be ready to strike Iran as early as this weekend, though officials do not expect strikes to happen that soon. President Trump gave another warning to Iran.
They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
Meanwhile, Iran and Russia conducted joint military drills in the Gulf of Oman and northern Indian Ocean on Thursday. CNN's Kristen Holmes has more details on the U.S. tensions with Iran from the White House.
President Trump continues to weigh a range of options when it comes to military intervention in Iran. This would include either targeted strikes that might force Iran to the table for negotiating to a much more longer, prolonged military operation. We are told that behind closed doors, President Trump just has not made a final decision here. Now, the White House has stressed that the first option the president would like to take is diplomacy. And today he discussed what that timeline would look like in terms of Iran coming back to the table before there could be potential strikes. Take a listen.
I would think that would be enough time, 10, 15 days. Pretty much maximum.
And now he said 10 to 15 days. That was just hours after he had said 10 days. So clearly there is a shifting timeline. And really this kind of ambiguity or vagueness is something that we are hearing is happening behind the scenes as well. I talked to a number of advisors who seemed to not know how to communicate or did not know why exactly it was in America's best interest to get involved now in some kind of military intervention in Iran and how to communicate that to the people. Remember, there are still a number of questions here as to what exactly the United States is hoping to achieve if they are going to, in fact, strike Iran. Is this going to be a targeting of top leadership? Is this a targeting of enrichment capabilities or ballistic missile facilities? We do not have those answers from the White House or from the administration. And if it is to be some kind of regime change that the United States is hoping for, it is unclear that the United States or the administration has a plan as to what exactly that would look like on day 2 after these strikes. right now, the White House has not really sold to the American public why there might be this heightened sense of needing or urgency to go into Iran. But we do know President Trump has not yet made up his mind. He is weighing these various military interventions, as well as this idea of trying to reach some kind of diplomatic solution. Kristen Holmes, CNN.
President Trump is facing perhaps one of the most important decisions of his second term, and that is what actions, if any, to take against Iran over its nuclear program. The president is extending his own timeline for making a decision on Iran, saying it will be another 10 to 15 days. Any possible attack could range from limited strikes to larger operations, potentially over weeks, targeting Iran's leaders and regime change. Now, all this comes as President Trump has ordered the largest military buildup in the Middle East in 22 years. Sources tell CNN the U.S. could be ready to strike Iran as early as this weekend. Officials do not expect strikes to happen that soon. Meanwhile, Iran and Russia conducted joint military drills in the Gulf of Oman and northern Indian Ocean on Thursday. President Trump giving another warning to Iran on Thursday.
They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
For more on this, let's bring in Abbas Aslani. He is an Iranian journalist and senior research fellow at the Center for Middle East Strategic Studies. He joins me live this hour from Tehran. Welcome to The Story Is. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Alex.
So we've talked so much about Iran. Very rarely do we get to talk to people in Iran live. So what's it like on the ground right now, and how is the reaction to what's happening?
Well, Alex, we are seeing different developments taking place in parallel. One is the diplomatic track, occurring between Iran and the United States. Some people are paying attention to that, but in the meantime, we are also hearing, threatening rhetoric from the U.S. side, the increasing political, economic sanctions, or the significant military buildup in the region. And this has created a heavy canopy of uncertainty surrounding these developments, that in what direction that the developments will be moving toward. And this, brings the situation to the, ambiguity whereby it makes it a bit difficult to predict how things will unfold in the coming days or weeks. And let's not forget that the specter of past negotiations back in 2025 also is casting a heavy shadow over the negotiating table, which has made the situation a bit more complex and complicated.
Do you feel like the Iranian government is going to find some sort of middle ground to reach a deal with the U.S.? What would that potentially look like?
Iranian delegation, when they returned from Geneva, the recent talks with the United States, they started working on the draft of a potential agreement, the text, which is supposed to be exchanged with the United States in the coming days. But the point is that if you want to somehow expedite the process, you need to be working on that more. But American delegation, they are, treating the talks like in Geneva like a diplomatic drive-through. They are coming just for a few hours, not spending that much time. So, treating that like a side hustle will not be working for negotiators. They need to be spending more time. And true diplomacy is the marriage of intention and attention. So Iran is ready and willing to engage in that process, to stay longer, even for days, to negotiate that. And this could not be a fast food-like, process to be, hammered out in a very short and few hours, because the technicalities need work. And this can be the case also if they spend more time. Iran is also stressing the time. It is not a logistical preference, but a security necessity for the the track. Because the time gap between the negotiation rounds, Alex, is a oxygen for the arsonists to set the process on fire. There are saboteurs and spoilers who do not like to see this happening. So that's as quickly as this happens, that will be the interest of Iran as well as the United States. And this is why I'm stressing that time factor is very important.
Yes, it is. Abbas Aslani joining us from Tehran, where it is now 8 o'clock in the morning on Friday. Good morning to you.
There's breaking news tonight as the U.S. is positioning warships and military assets in the Middle East. President Trump is extending his time frame on a decision to strike Iran, saying his decision could come in the next 10 to 15 days. But sources tell CNN the military could be ready to strike as soon as this weekend. President Trump has this message today for Iran.
They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
In June, President Trump ordered a strike on 3 key nuclear sites in Iran. Then last month, thousands of Iranians, the complete number, of course, is not known, were killed in anti-government protests. And Mr. Trump encouraged the protesters to take over government institutions, writing, quote, "Help is on its way." That help never came, and nuclear talks with Iran continued this week in Geneva with no resolution. Democratic Congressman and U.S. Marine veteran Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts joins me now. Congressman, we said the president put a timeline of 10 to 15 days on negotiations with Iran. Do you put much stock in those timelines?
No, I don't. I do put stock in the largest U.S. military buildup in the region since Operation Iraqi Freedom, though. I think there's 3 security realities that are defining this situation right now, Anderson. The first is that Iran is in control on the ground. Its interior, its police, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, they have taken back control from the protests, and it does not look like regime change is imminent organically. Number 2, though, is Iran is not control of the skies. Because of the Israeli strikes last year, anything above 10,000 feet, Iran really has no domain awareness and no ability to impede, which means that the United States military absolutely can work its will through aerial strikes. And strategically, it would be sound to do so to impair any nuclear or ballistic missile development. And then the final reality is that the Ayatollah himself is old and sick and isolated. He's going to die soon. So this would be the ideal time for Donald Trump to actually work some statesmanship, come to Congress, ask for a very tightly scoped authorization for the use of military force because the aerial strikes would be illegal otherwise, but also ask for Congress to lay out what would allow Iran to rejoin the community of nations in the Middle East when the Ayatollah dies and a succession plan takes place. That way we can actually lay the groundwork for a succession after the Ayatollah's death where moderates have a chance to campaign and win to take that mantle.
Is it clear to you, though, what the objective of, I mean, if it's a bombing missile, multiple strikes over multiple days, whatever the action is, what the objective would be? Because, I mean, again, regime change is difficult to do from the air. And I understand the idea of, targeting nuclear sites, targeting any air defenses that they've rebuilt. But that doesn't help those who are languishing in jails, whose family members were killed during protests. It doesn't actually create regime change necessarily.
No. And as I said, I don't think regime change is imminent from the protests, nor do I think these strikes, as you said, would accomplish any type of civil rights or internet freedom wins. There are things the president could have and should have done, including surging direct-to-cell technology when he promised help months ago and failed to do. What these military strikes would do would be really to continue to impair nuclear weapon development. There are signals that Iran is trying to restart at least one of those plants that was demolished. And probably more importantly, actually, would degrade their ballistic missile development. Their ballistic missiles are a more imminent threat to Israel and to Arab states than even their nuclear weapon program, because those ballistic missiles, while most of them are shot down by Iron Dome and air defenses in the region, not all of them are, and they do significant damage.
Yeah. Congressman Jake Auchincloss, thanks for being on. I appreciate it. I want to bring in our CNN Global Affairs analyst, Brett McGurk, who's served in senior national security posts under the last 4 presidents, including President Trump. Brett, you and I talked a lot during the strikes against the nuclear facilities months ago. You know better than most how to read what may be happening. What do you expect to see?
I'd say 2 things at the top, Anderson. I think first, there's really no urgency here. I think President Trump owns the clock. I think he can take some time, see where the diplomacy goes. At the same time, I'm very skeptical. The Iranians are showing no indication they're prepared to do a serious deal. So I think this is coming to a head. And then it gets to exactly as you've been asking, Anderson, what is the objective? You know, Karl von Clausewitz, a 19th century military theorist, said any leader that orders military action must be clear in his mind exactly what he wants to achieve and how he intends to achieve it. And here, unlike every other military operation President Trump has ordered in his first term or second term, the objectives here are actually very unclear and potentially open-ended.
We talked a lot at the beginning of the year about what kind of threat widespread protests in Iran pose to the regime. Those protests, I mean, have for the most part been crushed by Iranian authorities brutally. Would a U.S.-Israeli attack give the political opposition, or give just any opposition there, a chance to go back into the streets or you know, overthrow a regime? Again, it seems hard to do from air.
Well, I think if you're looking at a potential military operation, and again, I'm not saying this is necessarily a good idea, but what would be the buckets of targets? Number one would be the nuclear. But to do the nuclear, you also have to take out the missiles. So those 2, I think, are automatic. And then there's a third, which gets to your question. Do you also strike the kind of repressive apparatus of the regime? That would be the headquarters of the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps and the besieged militias that conducted this massacre in January. This really kind of shocked the conscience of much of the world. You could put those targets in the deck. I think we know where those targets are. But to your question, the hope might be that it would deter the regime when protests start again, and they will at some point, from conducting another crackdown, which could then open fissures in the system. Again, that's all very uncertain. But I would say, Anderson, if we're looking at a military action, I would just anticipate the missiles first. You have to take out the missiles to degrade Iran's ability to respond to whatever you're going to do. Then some nuclear targets. Again, we can talk about those, what might be left. And then the question is, do you also hit those repressive apparatuses of the regime? Given President Trump's statements, which you just put on air moments ago during the protests, that help is on its way, I think it'd be very hard for him not to follow through on that. And given the scope of the massacre, you know, even the Europeans, Anderson, since the massacre, all 27 states of the European Union has designated the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC, as a terrorist group. I actually never thought I would see that happen. So a lot has happened here. But again, I think the president has kind of backed himself into a corner here. He's hoping, I think, diplomacy succeeds. But I don't think Khamenei, the other decision maker here, the supreme leader of Iran, is going to give him that off-ramp based upon what he's been saying. So I still think this has a couple weeks to play out, Anderson, but it seems to be coming to a head.
We have breaking news. CNN learning new details of military options that President Trump is considering inside Iran, and we're told that strikes could happen as soon as this weekend. This as Trump is publicly offering different deadlines for Iran to make a deal on their nuclear program. Trump saying they now have 10 to 15 days after saying this hours earlier.
So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days. They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
Now, that comes as the U.S. is conducting a massive military buildup near Iran. It's the largest in the Middle East since 2004, moving aircraft carriers, warships, and fighter jets into the region. Iran and Russia countering with their own show of force today, conducting naval exercises off the waters of Iran. Kristen Holmes is out front from the White House. And Kristen, you are breaking this new reporting on the potential targets that the president is looking at in Iran. What are you learning?
Yeah, Brianna, we are learning that the president has been presented with a large range of options here when it comes to actual strikes in Iran. This is anywhere from brief, quick strikes that would take out potentially a facility to something of a more prolonged military intervention. And some of the plans include taking out the top leadership in Tehran, for example. Now, one of the things that to keep in mind here is that Iran has already said that if there are these quick strikes, that they will likely retaliate in some way. So that's something to keep in mind here. And the military has been preparing for a potentially prolonged intervention in Iran. But Brianna, one of the big questions here is what exactly is the United States and the administration trying to accomplish here? We still don't have a clear understanding of what they're trying to do with these strikes. Are they trying to take out leaders to force regime change? Are they trying to take out enrichment facilities? Are they trying to minimize or take out ballistic capabilities from Iran? That has not been made clear by these White House officials. And I spoke to a number of officials who also didn't quite seem to know why exactly this urgency was here now, why we might be conducting these strikes now. And they certainly haven't sold the American public on this idea. But President Trump is still weighing all of these decisions. We were told by White House officials he has not made up his mind. He still wants to go the diplomatic approach. But we have heard from a number of administration officials now who say the two sides are nowhere near an actual resolution. So it certainly seems as though we are inching towards some sort of military intervention. One thing to keep in mind, troops have not been given a target list yet, which indicates that President Trump has not given the go on any sort of military intervention at this time.
Important to note. Kristen Holmes, thank you so much for that report from the White House. And out front now, Nazila Fatih, a former New York Times correspondent based in Tehran for a decade. She was forced to flee the country with her husband and children. Nazila, you still have family and a lot of friends in Iran, and I know you're in regular contact with people there. What are they telling you about how they're feeling inside Iran as Trump is threatening military intervention here?
Well, Brianna, people are terrified. They are scared because of the same reasons that Kristen just mentioned. They don't know what the objective of these operations are going to be. They don't know what is the purpose. And the consequences can be very different if there are a couple of surgical attacks or if the United States wants to have regime change in Iran. So the not knowing and the maybes, maybe we will do this, maybe we won't do it, maybe there will be diplomatic solution, maybe there will be military operations. I think that's what is worrying most people on the ground.
What are they most afraid of? That this is something larger and the ramifications of that? What are they telling you?
Well, the situation is very ambiguous, and this is what President Trump has always done in his foreign policy. He puts the worst consequences on the table, the biggest threat, the biggest guns on the table, but he doesn't specify exactly what he wants. Nobody knows what the outcome that he wants is. So both Iranian officials have been watching this process carefully. The point is that everybody, Iranian people, Iranian officials, they know President Trump doesn't bluff, that he comes through with what he says. So there are worries that any kind of military strike can get out of control. Iran does have retaliatory capabilities, and it can retaliate against forces in the region.
And as you just heard Kristen laying out the options that Trump is considering in Iran in her new reporting here, these targeted strikes on nuclear facilities, maybe to a more sustained operation that could last weeks, to toppling the government. I mean, this really is the range. You do say that a significant number of Iranians would welcome a U.S. operation aimed at regime change. What are you hearing?
In January, when Iranians were protesting, President Trump did send a message to Iranians that they should keep protesting, help is on the way. And Iranians went out, and what they were faced with was a regime that went to very extreme measures, killed thousands of people. And the idea of the massacre is very present in their minds. I think the regime has entered a very critical point at this point. It's a historic time. Iranians want this regime gone. And there is a big population inside the country that believes President Trump has a magic wand and can somehow magically get rid of the Islamic regime. That view is clearly not shared by everybody, but people are frustrated, they are angry, and they want this regime gone.
Yeah, and when they look at those who are concerned about retaliation by Iranian forces and what that would look like, can you expand on that a little bit more about their concerns?
Well, Iran has missile capabilities, so it can hit some targets in the region, and that might get out of control. Iran is a country of 92 million people. It is made up of many different ethnic groups. Many of them have been seeking independence and separation from Iran. Many of them are armed. Any kind of instability in Iran can lead to a civil war, and that civil war, that instability can spill over to the region. So there are some very serious concerns here.
Nazila Fatih, wonderful to have you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is prepared to strike Iran as soon as this weekend as President Trump weighs his options. He did issue this warning to Tehran earlier today.
They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
President Trump suggesting a decision on what happens next will come in the next 10 days. Joining us now to discuss, Republican Congressman Ryan McKenzie of Pennsylvania. He's on the House Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. So I want to start with a question a lot of Americans may have. Why does the U.S. need to strike Iran regarding the nuclear program? Because President Trump repeatedly said last summer that the U.S. had obliterated Iran's nuclear facilities. What threat would need such immediate action?
Yeah, so we need to show great restraint in military action against Iran. And we certainly did have a very successful strike, as you pointed out, years ago, with those military capabilities being deactivated for Iran. But we do have to make sure that any new capabilities that they are developing do not threaten to destabilize the region all over again. At the same time, what we see is Congress, we have Representatives Khanna and Massey putting forward a war powers resolution, which is very vague, very ill-defined, and I think would actually leave America less safe and more vulnerable to potential conflicts in the Middle East. So we have to be very careful here. It's something we're engaging with the administration on as they move forward.
Do you have any concerns about another strike on Iran without congressional authorization? I mean, the War Powers Act that you're referring to notwithstanding, I mean, it is supposed to be the task of Congress to declare war. This would be the second military attack, and there doesn't seem to be any immediate danger to the U.S.
Yeah, and so this is something that is not clearly defined. This is why we have these debates in Congress all the time about what is an imminent threat against the United States. When should we step in as Congress to take action? And certainly we do not want to see boots on the ground. We do not want to see another forever war in the Middle East. So again, we need to show great restraint here, but precise or precision attacks that can help deactivate somebody's military or nuclear ambitions, I think are certainly warranted in certain situations, but we do want to evaluate on a case-by-case basis.
Satellite images appear to show Iran rapidly fortifying some of its nuclear sites. What does that signal to you about what could be targeted in any potential strikes by the U.S.?
Well, I think certainly we also need to recognize not only their nuclear ambitions, but also the fact that we are engaged in diplomatic negotiations at this time. So there are instances where countries like Iran want to posture and maybe bluff on what their nuclear capabilities are. So our intelligence community is assessing those things. As a member of Foreign Affairs, as you pointed out, we do receive top secret classified briefings on a regular basis. Chairman Mast hosts those for those of us that are members of the committee every week when we're in session. And so when we go back next week, we're certainly going to be looking for more information from the intelligence community.
There is obviously a logical concern about what Iran's retaliation might look like. On Tuesday, Iran's supreme leader threatened to sink U.S. warships if the U.S. chooses to strike. So If the U.S. does strike Iran, how do you anticipate Iran might respond?
Well, that's a real challenge in this situation. Obviously, they are not a rational actor. They have different motivations than most other participants on the global stage. And so, again, this is why you have to show great restraint that we don't get entangled into some kind of conflict unnecessarily. And so, again, when we go back into session next week, we're going to be looking for more information from the intelligence community, from the administration. But again, the war powers resolution that's being proposed is not the answer. It is very vague, and again, would leave us more vulnerable and susceptible to attacks.
Extending his timeline for a decision on potential U.S. military action against Iran, now saying that decision could come in 10 to 15 days. Hours earlier, he said it could come within the next 10 days, so a little bit of movement there. He also issued this warning.
They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
All that in front of the Board of Peace sign. Sources tell CNN the U.S. military is prepared to strike Iran as early as this weekend. The Vice President, J.D. Vance, says Tehran did not acknowledge some of the U.S. red lines in this week's talks in Geneva. These satellite images appear to show that Iran is fortifying some of its nuclear facilities using concrete and large amounts of soil. Escalating tensions are pushing Brent oil prices up above $70 a barrel, with concerns over potential supply disruptions in the Middle East. Also here in Washington, President Trump convened the first formal meeting of the Board of Peace for Gaza reconstruction. He says the United States will contribute $10 billion to the board, and other countries, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia, have given more than $7 billion. Apollo Global Management CEO Mark Rowan, a member of the executive board, says the initial plan is to build 100,000 homes in the southern city of Rafah. Kristen Holmes is live at the White House. Kristen, can you give us a sense as to your best understanding? And I understand that this timeline is somewhat changeable, as we've noticed, but your best understanding of where the decision-making stands on attacking Iran.
Well, right now, President Trump hasn't made a decision, and we know that to be true from a number of sources and U.S. officials. We also know that there hasn't been any kind of target strike list that has been given to the U.S. military, indicating that there has been no real decision by President Trump. And you heard him give this timeline first 10 days, and then just a few hours later, it turned from 10 to 15 days as a potential for Iran to turn around and come back with some kind of diplomatic deal. And we even heard from the White House just moments ago telling me in a statement that President Trump has told Iran to make a deal or else, and pointing to the various military operations in both Iran earlier, the strikes against those nuclear facilities, as well as the capture of Maduro, to show that President Trump means business. But right now, President Trump is weighing a range of options. It could be anything from these short strikes that would force Iran into a negotiating position, or to something that was more drawn out. Now, we've been trying to ask the White House if Americans should be preparing for some kind of prolonged war with Iran, and we just don't have answers on that yet. And I was actually told by several advisors within the White House that they didn't even really know how to communicate why the White House or why the United States was getting involved in some kind of military intervention in Iran, and particularly at this time. I mean, Jim, there are still questions as to what exactly a military intervention or what exactly strikes would do. Is this meant to take out top leadership? Is this meant to strike an enrichment facility? Is this meant to end their ballistic missiles capabilities? It is unclear why now and why it is in Americans' best interest to get involved now, other than the generic, Iran is bad and they shouldn't have nuclear weapons. So we're still asking a number of questions here to try to get a read on what exactly are these conversations behind closed doors. And Jim, what is the day 2 plan here? I mean, if part of this is to take out the top leadership, what is next for a regime change in Iran? Who would be in line? I mean, we heard Secretary of State Marco Rubio essentially say they didn't have a plan for that. That was just 2 weeks ago or a week and a half ago. So has that changed, or where are we headed with all of this?
Yeah, and what would even the value be of a U.S. plan for succession? How much control would it have? Kristen Holmes at the White House, thanks so much. Joining me now is Vali Nasr. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. He's also the author of Iran's Grand Strategy of Political History, longtime Iran analyst. Vali, good to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So you now have this discussion of the possibility of short strikes just as a pressure tactic against Iran to perhaps bring them to the table more seriously. In your latest analysis, you say Iran is preparing for a long war. Tell us your best read of how this is going to play out.
Well, I think there's a risk that Iran will not just come to the table if there are short-term strikes, that it will calculate that it's much better for it to retaliate against the United States, because so far, symbolically reacting to American bombings of its nuclear facilities has only encouraged additional military threats. So I think they would like to sort of draw the point for White House that there is a cost to going to war with Iran, that this is not going to be like Venezuela. It's not going to be without casualties, without cost to the region. And the only way they can show that is actually by striking at U.S. personnel, U.S. ships, U.S. facilities, as well as across the region.
Yeah. And listen, of course, the danger of escalation, if that were to happen. What is your best read of Iran's capabilities now to carry out a robust retaliation, given all the strikes we've seen, particularly from Israel in the last year, but also the U.S.? Do they have the capability to do so?
Well, first of all, during last year's attacks, they did hit Tel Aviv and Haifa, and about 20% of their missiles got through Israel's Iron Dome. But Israel is sitting much farther away from Iran. U.S. ships are sitting off of Iran's shore. Yeah. So it's not just long-range ballistic missiles, but short-range missiles. And Iran can also not target the U.S. necessarily, but target oil facilities, tankers, shipping, drive the price of oil up. And secondly, the question of how effective Iran's retaliation would be is in the eyes of the beholder. It really depends on what is the President Trump's threshold for a cost of war. Is it one body bag? Is it 1,000? Is it one oil facility? It's definitely not going to be zero. And the Iranians want to argue it will not be zero, because that's the only way in which they think they can deter President Trump.
Sources have told CNN the president has privately argued both for and against military action, and we've seen him kind of toggle back and forth on his own timeline here. Is it clear to you, or to anyone really, what is the objective? What is his objective if he chooses to strike?
No. No, the objective is not clear, and he hasn't actually communicated it. He said last summer that he had obliterated Iran's nuclear program. There was nothing to talk about. And for months, he wouldn't talk to Iran about their nuclear program. All of a sudden, he wants a nuclear deal immediately, otherwise he's going to go to war over a program that he claimed that he had already destroyed. And if the goal is regime change, he hasn't said that, because that's not what's being discussed in Geneva and in Muscat. So to say that the Iranians need to make a deal, otherwise there would be war, if the goal is regime change, that's not what they're talking about. If the goal is a nuclear deal, then, this doesn't sound like that. Why is it that all of a sudden he's picked on this issue with this massive armada after he claimed that he had put the issue to rest last summer?
Yeah. Tell me how the region sees this, because there had been some reporting that when President Trump was considering strikes a couple of weeks ago, that America's Arab allies pulled him back from the brink. Are they applying the same kind of pressure now?
Yes, because what these aircraft carriers in the region represent is America's ability to hit Iran. But the region is not confident that the U.S. has the capacity to protect them from Iranian retaliation, and that the U.S. is not shown them a pathway that the war with Iran would be short-term, and that it will not end up lasting months and months, in which case it will completely undermine their economic programs about a digital future, investments, the kind of post-oil economies they're investing in. And I think that right now they see whatever problems they have with Iran, they see instability as a greater threat to themselves than the Iran that's sitting across the Gulf. And the prospect of a U.S. war actually to them means the start of the unknown, of instability, and makes them very nervous.
Yeah. Final question, if I can, just on the possibility of a nuclear deal. It struck me that a couple of the U.S. demands sound quite similar to the JCPOA, the deal negotiated by President Obama, taking enriched uranium out of the country, perhaps sending it to Russia, et cetera. I mean, is there a realistic pathway to some sort of nuclear deal between the U.S. and Iran?
There is, if the two things. If the United States actually was negotiating the deal, it's not. It basically wants a declaration that everything is solved, and then the details would be worked out later. I mean, you can't send two envoys for a 3-hour meeting in the middle of their conversations with Russia and Ukraine on another major global issue. And it doesn't look like President Trump is looking for a detailed negotiation here. Secondly, he's not looking for a deal. He's asking Iran to surrender everything. And it's not clear he's offering anything realistic in return that the Iranians could actually trust. So I think the prospect is there, but I don't see a deal happening in the short term.
Sounds a lot like the trade deals, right? Kind of a couple pieces of paper, but not actually a detailed document. Vali Nasser, thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
The U.S. military is prepared to strike Iran as early as this weekend. Top national security officials met Wednesday in the White House Situation Room, but sources say President Trump is yet to make a final decision on the issue, and that he has privately argued both for and against military action and is polling his various advisors about what he should do. According to new satellite imagery, Iran is rapidly fortifying several of its nuclear facilities. Photos from concrete and large amounts of soil being used to bury key sites in recent weeks. Here's what Democratic Congressman Jim Hines told CNN's Anderson Cooper.
The president has now conducted a military attack on Caracas, which went flawlessly, and he's conducted a military attack on the tunnels, the nuclear infrastructure in Iran. That also went flawlessly. So right now the president believes that he can do this stuff without much risk, which is, by the way, a very dangerous frame of mind because there's a lot of risk involved. I think that both the United States and the Israelis are aware of the fact that the Iranians are doing carefully what they can to sort of restore what was damaged in the initial attacks. And so, yeah.
They are doing that. They're doing what they can to restore it.
Yeah. Look, they're clearing tunnels. They're restoring electricity. They're doing stuff in tunnels that we can't see. So, I mean, I think they're probably doing everything they can to try to rebuild what was destroyed a number of months ago. So when you say imminent, is it this week? I don't know. Remember, the president will be satisfied with something that is cinematic, that makes a big boom and destroys and breaks a lot of stuff. That's what happened in Caracas. He doesn't care so much about the longer questions of regime change, which are much more challenging.
We have breaking news. CNN learning new details of military options that President Trump is considering inside Iran, and we're told that strikes could happen as soon as this weekend. This as Trump is publicly offering different deadlines for Iran to make a deal on their nuclear program. Trump saying they now have 10 to 15 days after saying this hours earlier.
So now we may have to take it a step further, or we may not. Maybe we're going to make a deal. You're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days. They cannot continue to threaten the stability of the entire region, and they must make a deal. Or if that doesn't happen, I maybe can understand. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But bad things will happen if it doesn't.
Now, that comes as the U.S. is conducting a massive military buildup near Iran. It's the largest in the Middle East since 2004, moving aircraft carriers, warships, and fighter jets into the region. Iran and Russia countering with their own show of force today, conducting naval exercises off the waters of Iran. Kristen Holmes is out front from the White House. And Kristen, you are breaking this new reporting on the potential targets that the president is looking at in Iran. What are you learning?
Yeah, Brianna, we are learning that the president has been presented with a large range of options here when it comes to actual strikes in Iran. This is anywhere from brief, quick strikes that would take out potentially a facility to something of a more prolonged military intervention. And some of the plans include taking out the top leadership in Tehran, for example. Now, one of the things that to keep in mind here is that Iran has already said that if there are these quick strikes, that they will likely retaliate in some way. So that's something to keep in mind here. And the military has been preparing for a potentially prolonged intervention in Iran. But Brianna, one of the big questions here is what exactly is the United States and the administration trying to accomplish here? We still don't have a clear understanding of what they're trying to do with these strikes. Are they trying to take out leaders to force regime change? Are they trying to take out enrichment facilities? Are they trying to minimize or take out ballistic capabilities from Iran? That has not been made clear by these White House officials. And I spoke to a number of officials who also didn't quite seem to know why exactly this urgency was here now, why we might be conducting these strikes now. And they certainly haven't sold the American public on this idea. But President Trump is still weighing all of these decisions. We were told by White House officials he has not made up his mind. He still wants to go the diplomatic approach. But we have heard from a number of administration officials now who say the two sides are nowhere near an actual resolution. So it certainly seems as though we are inching towards some sort of military intervention. One thing to keep in mind, troops have not been given a target list yet, which indicates that President Trump has not given the go on any sort of military intervention at this time.
Important to note. Kristen Holmes, thank you so much for that report from the White House. And out front now, Nazila Fati, a former New York Times correspondent based in Tehran for a decade. She was forced to flee the country with her husband and children. Nazila, you still have family and a lot of friends in Iran, and I know you're in regular contact with people there. What are they telling you about how they're feeling inside Iran as Trump is threatening military intervention here?
Well, Brianna, people are terrified. They are scared because of the same reasons that Kristen just mentioned. They don't know what the objective of these operations are going to be. They don't know what is the purpose. And the consequences can be very different if there are a couple of surgical attacks or if the United States wants to have regime change in Iran. So the not knowing and the maybes, maybe we will do this, maybe we won't do it, maybe there will be diplomatic solution, maybe there will be military operations. I think that's what is worrying most people on the ground.
What are they most afraid of? That this is something larger and the ramifications of that? What are they telling you?
Well, the situation is very ambiguous, and this is what President Trump has always done in his foreign policy. He puts the worst consequences on the table, the biggest threat, the biggest guns on the table, but he doesn't specify exactly what he wants. Nobody knows what the outcome that he wants is. So both Iranian officials have been watching this process carefully. The point is that everybody, Iranian people, Iranian officials, they know President Trump doesn't bluff, that he comes through with what he says. So there are worries that any kind of military strike can get out of control. Iran does have retaliatory.
Breaking news, President Trump hinting he may be close to making up his mind on an American military strike on Iran, a strike or a war that could be just hours away.
Now we have a big decision to make. You know that. Not easy. Not easy. We have a very big decision to make. We have a country that's been, for 47 years, blowing people's legs off, arms off, the face. They've been knocking out ships, killing people, lots of people, not only Americans, lots of people. It's been terrible. 32,000 people killed over the last 2-3 months. I'd rather do it the peaceful way, but they're very difficult people.
Trump also saying he's unhappy that Iran is not giving the United States everything it wants during nuclear talks. But the Omani foreign minister tonight with very significant comments to Margaret Brennan saying that Iran has agreed to, quote, never stockpile nuclear material. It is a major concession. It is a shift from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. Trump's comments, though, come as Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned no American should travel to Iran for any reason. And just hours after the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, told embassy staff if they want to leave the country, they must leave today, which was a very inflammatory comment. All of this, as sources tell CNN, there is no U.S. intelligence that Iran is building missiles that could soon hit the United States. That's a really big deal, even though Trump himself claimed that in the State of the Union to support a possible strike. Jeremy Diamond is out front tonight in Jerusalem. And Jeremy, what are you hearing about how close a a possible strike is. I mean, you know, if you go online, you see a satellite images and the bombers are here and they moved here and they, you know, and they make it sound as if it's happening any second. But what are you actually hearing when it comes to the facts?
Well, at this hour, Aaron, in the region, there are a number of indicators pointing to the potential, at least, for imminent U.S. strikes on Iran. And that's for a number of reasons. All of the components of the U.S. military buildup that's been taking place over the course of the last month, they all now appear to be in place. That includes 2 carrier strike groups, dozens of fighter jets, including about a dozen F-22 stealth fighter jets that have been positioned at an Israeli airbase for what seems to be the first time ever. And then you've got this email from the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, not just authorizing staff to leave the country, but also saying in all caps that if they want to do so, they should do so today. Similar steps were taken at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut earlier this week, where staff were also evacuated, and a number of other countries are now issuing travel warnings for Israel and other countries in the Middle East, pointing to this buildup of tensions, and also some of these countries that may have been briefed on intelligence that we're simply not privy to. What we don't know at this stage is whether or not President Trump has actually made a decision, and that's why looking at his comments earlier today is quite informative. I mean, you can hear the president wrestling with the issue, talking about the fact that he's not getting everything he wants to get out of Iran so far, noting that he prefers diplomacy, but also making clear that sometimes military action is necessary. Ultimately, we know that there are talks scheduled in Vienna, technical talks on these U.S.-Iran negotiations scheduled in Vienna on Monday. Whether or not we actually get there, though, still seems to be an open question. Aaron.
All right. Jeremy, thank you very much in Tel Aviv tonight. And I want to go to Kareem Sadjapur, Senior Fellow at the Carnegie Endowment now. And Kareem, you know, talking to your sources all day, I mean, you know what I'm talking about when I say if you go to social media, you know, it's as if it's a second away. That's been true, though, for days when you look at what you see there. So, again, when it comes to the facts, what your sources are telling you, where are we right now?
Aaron, it really changes day to day based on some of the statements coming from the president. And I think one of the reasons why it's not clear to us is that it's not clear in the president's head what his objectives are. What are the objectives of negotiations? What are the concessions he's hoping to get from the Iranians? What would be the objectives of military action? I think there is a broad consensus both in Washington and in the region that the likelihood of military action is much higher than the likelihood of a deal, but it changes day to day. And you know, meanwhile, 92 million Iranians are waiting to see what their fate is going to be.
I mean, you know, look, Trump's made it clear that he's not happy with how negotiations with Iran are going, right? And I mean, Kareem, in a sense, it's not really a negotiation, right? He said, give me everything I want or else. So, you know, enter in the Omani foreign minister. He's a really important player. He's been the middleman in the negotiations. He's at the table every time in all of the pictures, right? He just went on with Margaret and said that Iran has agreed to no longer stockpile enriched uranium. Now, understanding that in the past what Iran has said is not necessarily what Iran has done. They have never said this before. They have never put this on the table, okay? Is this a big concession?
It's not yet clear, Aaron, whether the Omani foreign minister is actually speaking the exact words of Iran's supreme leader. The Omanis obviously want to avert a conflict, given that they're in the blast zone. But you know, I follow this very closely, and it's not clear to me what the president's objectives are. In the past, Secretary Rubio has said that the U.S. has 4 main objectives in negotiations. It's not only zero enrichment, nuclear enrichment, but it's also curtailing missiles, curtailing Iran's regional proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and human rights, treating its people better. But when the president speaks on this topic, it changes day to day. So if it's not clear to me, I'm not sure how clear it is to the Iranians.
True. And then also those things that you list, if they were even to be formal objectives, which I know Rubio is saying doesn't make them right, doesn't make them to be, that's not something you do, you know, with just some kind of quick strikes and we're done. It's just not, that's not a list that you accomplish with that. You mentioned missiles, though, on the list, Kareem, and during the State of the Union, you know, at that sort of Colin Powell moment, President Trump made a claim about missiles and Iran's development of missiles as a potential justification to go to war. Here's what he said.
They've already developed missiles that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America.
Former leader of Sweden, Carl Bildt, took that on head on, saying it was false. And sources today tell CNN that claim that Trump made is not backed up by U.S. intelligence, that there's no intelligence currently suggesting Iran is pursuing an ICBM program to hit the United States. So, what's your reaction when you hear claims being made that, at least as we understand it, the intelligence says are not true?
Well, the Iraq war is in recent memory for many of us, and obviously for many in Washington. So I think these concerns about the president's lack of clarity are taken very seriously. In my sense, and this is, I think, reflected in polling, there's diminishing support for conflict, not only in the Democratic Party, but among Republicans as well. There's growing concern. And so I think this lack of clarity in the language, lack of clarity in objectives, concerns that some of the justifications for war are being embellished. In some ways, I think the possible popularity of this potential military action has gone down. Aaron, what I think is interesting about this moment is that it's probably one of the few times in modern history in which the citizens of the country that may be bombed, the citizens of Iran, are probably more supportive of a military attack than the citizens of the country that would do the bombing, citizens of the United States.
What an incredible thing to say. I mean, just such a simple truth, but how powerful it is when you put it in those words. Kareem, thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Aaron.
Another topic, and that is the possibility of looming U.S. military action against Iran. There is, of course, this discharge petition that's been circulating demanding a word from Congress on any potential military action. Given that there is some apparent urgency now, some possible expectations that the president is willing to go ahead and order action, I mean, should Congress have accelerated that discharge position? I mean, if they bring it up next week, it could be too late.
I think we have to move on it expeditiously at this point because, A, I think the American people don't want us to go to war in Iran. They don't want another endless war in the Middle East, period. And then B, if President Trump really wants to make the case for a military strike, he needs to come to the people as embodied through their representatives in Congress and make the case. The War Powers Act is very clear. Only Congress has the power to deploy armed troops and hostilities, except in an emergency situation, and that is not where we are right now.
I wonder, as the president considers military action, there's been some reporting that he would like something, in effect, short and sweet, to force, if need be, Iran to the negotiating table more seriously. Is that, in your view, a realistic prospect to go in believing that you can limit, well, any sort of risk of escalation?
No, that's the problem. I think that the Iranians have a vote in this as well. We can't control their actions. And if they were to retaliate on our troops or through their proxies on others, it could trigger a regional war. Now, the other thing is, we don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon. They must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. In addition, I've said, and many others have said, they should not have a ballistic missile program, and they shouldn't fund terrorists throughout the Middle East. But I think that diplomacy in concert with our friends, partners, and allies is the best way to achieve that. Any other type of approach could be very counterproductive to what we want.
Some of the demands that Trump administration are making sound somewhat familiar. Among them, removing enriched uranium from the country, which was, you'll remember, part of the JCPOA negotiated by President Obama. That at the time was sent to Russia, as well as IAEA monitoring, etc. I mean, do you see the Trump administration looking for something that looks similar to what we had a little over 10 years ago?
Possibly, yes. Mm-hmm. I think that they might be looking for something similar to that. And maybe they'll also add the ballistic missile program, the nefarious activities in the rest of the region to the menu of items that are covered within the scope. If that's the case, I think that would be a good outcome potentially. But any kind of military action could escalate very quickly and entangle us in something that we can ill afford right now. Again, my constituents are very clear. They do not want another war in the Middle East.
And it's fair criticism to your point that that previous agreement did not cover Iran's ballistic missile program. Congressman Krishnamurthy, always good to have you on. Thanks so much for joining again.
Thank you so much.
Staying with our coverage of Iran, Oman's foreign minister says that Iranian leaders have agreed to no longer stockpile enriched uranium inside Iran. The Omani. Earlier today, President Trump said, however, he is not happy with the negotiations at this stage. He did field a question about potential U.S. military strikes.
I guess you could say there's always a risk. You know, when there's war, there's a risk in anything, both good and bad. It'd be wonderful if they'd negotiate really in good conscience, good faith and conscience, but they are not getting there.
The U.S. Embassy in Israel says that non-essential staff and their families can leave the country immediately due to potential risks to their safety. The embassy added they should consider leaving while commercial flights are still flying. The world's largest warship, the USS Gerald R. Ford, is expected to arrive shortly off the coast of northern Israel. The Pentagon is sending a new group of F-22 fighter jets to the region to join the many dozens that are already there. Joining me now is Kevin Liptak from the White House. Kevin, in Corpus Christi, traveling with the president. Kevin, do you have a sense of how the White House is receiving these comments from Omani officials saying that Iran would agree to give up all its enriched uranium? Are they seeing this as progress? Because, of course, President Trump said he's not happy with where negotiations stand.
I think the White House sees the Omani foreign minister, who we should say rushed to Washington to meet Vice President Vance to try and sort of encourage these diplomatic conversations to continue and essentially prevent a new war. They see him as trying to underscore the importance of diplomacy, but they're not hearing, I think, anything from him that's necessarily going to move President Trump off of his view that the Iranians have so far not conceded enough in these talks to satisfy all of his demands. You know, it was something of an open question over the last day or so about how exactly the Americans had received the 2 rounds of indirect talks that occurred in Geneva. You know, the Iranians and the Omanis said that essentially there was progress made, that they had agreed to have their technical teams meet in Vienna next week, and that the discussions would continue. But I think it was evident just listening to President Trump today that he did not necessarily feel as if that progress was satisfactory enough. And it was interesting listening to him here in Corpus Christi. Obviously, the speech itself was not about Iran, but at the very end, he did acknowledge that he had a big decision in front of him. And actually, I think that might be the first time that we've actually heard from the president explicitly that he does have this now immense choice to either continue with these discussions, even though he doesn't think they're making enough progress, or carry out some sort of strike. Now, what exactly that looks like, we don't know. There's been discussions of these limited strikes on military targets that would essentially be meant to apply more pressure on the Iranians, to provide more concessions at the negotiating table. Or does he go for something much larger, something intended to take out the Iranian regime, despite all of the uncertainties that would entail? Now, the president also repeated what he has claimed is his red line here, which is that the Iranians must utter what today he called them golden words. In the past, he's called them secret words, which is that they will never obtain a nuclear weapon. I think the problem with that is the Iranians have in fact said that they will not obtain a nuclear weapon. The foreign minister said that this week heading into those negotiations. Now, there's a lot of reason to not believe them. Of course, they have enriched uranium to near weapons grade level. There have been all these indications in the past that they're trying to obtain a nuclear weapon. But if President Trump's sort of red line is just the Iranians' words alone, you know, that has already been achieved. That bar has already been cleared. And so it just, I think, leads to a lot more uncertainty about what precisely he is looking for in these negotiations. Yeah. Whatever that is, it's clear he hasn't found it yet.
Yeah, I mean, there's a big gap between military strikes to apply pressure for negotiations and military strikes to change the regime. Kevin Liptak in Texas, thanks so much. Join me now, retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commander of U.S. Army Europe. Good to have you. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Jim.
So first, as you watch this military force assembled now, and now with the recent arrival of the Ford, what is your best assessment of the size and scale and duration of a campaign that this force would be able to carry out? Days, weeks, months?
Well, I have to say first, Kevin Liptak's report just then was excellent. I mean, I was learning things, listening to him. He's very good. You know, the amount of combat power that has been assembled, particularly air power and sea power, is amazing. And there's no doubt that the leadership there, they have done so much in thinking through the options and contingencies and risks. One of the limiting factors is probably going to be the munitions that they have, particularly the precision weapons that are needed for certain types of targets. And I think they probably have enough to do several days, but I don't know that there's enough on hand to go multiple weeks. I don't know that, but that's my sense, is that they probably don't have that right now.
Yeah, that's a real concern. You hear it a lot, and particularly after the number of munitions that were expended during the attack on the Houthi rebels in the wake of that. Do the forces assembled have the capability, in your view, to defend U.S. forces and allies in the region from any Iranian retaliation? Because that's, of course, a big focus of this.
Yeah, I think the integrated air and missile defense assets that are in place with the Patriot systems, of course, and the THAAD, which is the high altitude air defense system. And then, of course, the aircraft themselves all are capable of air defense. So I would imagine the team there has done a very thorough job of assessing how to protect against the various type weapons that Iran might launch against them, and it'll be different types, of course. So they probably have a pretty good air defense set in place. What will be more difficult, of course, is if Iran strikes targets in Israel or other countries, then you start getting spread pretty thin.
Final question just on the Iran issue. Going back to Kevin Liptak's report there, is that the president has not articulated what the goal of these strikes would be. Is it limited strikes to force them to the negotiating table, or is it right up to and including regime change? Because those are quite different goals. I mean, both different scale, but also somewhat contradictory, right? Do you want to talk to these leaders about the nuclear program, or do you want to eliminate these leaders? What kind of confusion does that create for the military?
Well, and also on the Iranian side as well. I think you've put your finger on the main issue, Jim, as far as I'm concerned, is that what is the purpose? What are we trying to achieve? And every commander is always going to want to know, what is the strategic objective that I'm supposed to accomplish? Because that will affect how you go about your operations. And I don't know that there are any, or certainly not many cases in history where air power alone was able to achieve a strategic objective such as regime change. And of course, we're very good at the decapitation part, but we don't have a good record of regime change. And so, I mean, if that's the goal, you know, who changed to who or changed to what, and if it's imposed from the outside, that usually doesn't work very well either.
The U.S. ambassador to Israel has told embassy personnel who do want to leave the country that they should, quote, do so today. That's according to a source familiar with Mike Huckabee's email to staff that came as non-essential embassy personnel were cleared to leave Israel. It comes as a source tells CNN that U.S. President Donald Trump has been briefed on potential military operations in Iran over its nuclear program. Meantime, the USS General Ford, America's largest aircraft carrier, will soon be arriving off the coast of Israel. Nuclear talks in Geneva Thursday ended with signs of progress, but no agreement. The US and Iran are set to continue talks in Vienna next week. Oman's foreign minister is headed to Washington to meet with Vice President J.D. Vance. Sources say the two will discuss efforts to reach a deal with Iran. CNN's Jennifer Hansler joins us live now from Washington. So, Jennifer, we know that obviously there was no breakthrough yesterday, even though progress has been made, but there is still a lot of diplomatic activity, just in terms of J.D. Vance meeting with the Omani foreign minister. We know that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is heading to Israel next week as well. So there's clearly still, at this point, a clear attempt to sort of stave off any kind of military action. Donald Trump himself has talked about diplomacy being the preferred route here. Walk us through where things stand and what is the latest in terms of the progress that has been made in the negotiations so far.
Yeah, Zain. So we're kind of seeing these two parallel. Is the diplomatic track. We have the Omani foreign minister meeting with J.D. Vance, we believe, potentially right now to talk about a potential diplomatic off-ramp to what is going on here. The Omanis, of course, have been the key negotiator in these talks between Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and the Iranian team in Geneva, in Oman, and then next week as well. They are trying to find an off-ramp here because President Trump, as they keep saying, both Trump himself and his advisor, that he would prefer a diplomatic outcome. And now the Omanis have said there has been progress made, but there are still huge gaps based on what we are hearing from our sources and from our teams reporting, particularly on this issue of enrichment. The U.S. has continued to maintain that they do not want Iran to be able to enrich uranium. Iran said that's a red line, that they are not going to stop. They are going to keep doing it. They are not going to send off their enriched uranium to another country as it has been demanded by the United States. So there are still key gaps in that point. And another issue that has come to the fore more and more in the past several days is this issue of Iran's ballistic missile program. Now, this is something that is not being discussed at the current moment. Instead, this is something that the U.S. needs to see in future talks, according to U.S. officials. Secretary of State Marco Rubio called it a big problem that they are refusing, in his words, to discuss this issue with the U.S. or anyone else. They have made these claims that Iran is seeking to develop intercontinental ballistic missiles. Iran has rejected those claims, but this is becoming a key potential sticking point in any future diplomacy as well. At the same time as these diplomatic talks are going on, we have seen, of course, this massive military buildup in the region. There are huge amounts of U.S. military assets, and there are increasing signals that something could be coming to the fore. That message from the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, telling his non-essential staff if they want to leave to do so today. They have authorized the departure of non-emergency staff and family members to leave the embassy in Israel. There was also an ordered departure from the U.S. embassy in Lebanon. So we are seeing these mixed signals that seem to speak to the fact that all options still remain on the table here, Zain, and there may not have been a decision by the U.S. president yet.
U.S. Embassy in Israel now authorizing non-essential staff to leave the country. This comes as the U.S. military continues to build up its forces in the Middle East. CNN is told that President Trump has been briefed on potential military options in Iran, though it remains unclear whether he would authorize a strike at this particular time. While America's military may be prepared for war, the public is certainly not. Many Americans are concerned over the idea of another prolonged conflict in the Middle East. In response to those concerns, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance tells the Washington Post that there is, quote, no chance of the U.S. becoming embroiled in a years-long war. Meantime, talks in Geneva have not seen any major breakthrough. Let's bring in Paula Hancock, joining us live now from Abu Dhabi. So, Paula, no major breakthrough in terms of these talks, I guess, as a lot of people had been expecting. But we do know, as I mentioned, that J.D. Vance is meeting with the Omani foreign minister. We also know that Marco Rubio is traveling to Israel next week. There does seem to be still a concerted effort to stave off any sort of potential war with Iran. Where do things stand now?
There's a huge amount of diplomatic activity going on at the moment, Zain, and of course you can bet there are many phone calls, back channels being used to try and push the diplomatic process forward. You're right, there was no breakthrough in the talks on Thursday in Geneva, but what we heard from the Iranian side and also from the Omani side, the mediators, was positive, saying that there was progress that was made. We do know there will be these technical talks in in Vienna, starting potentially on Monday. This is where the UN nuclear watchdog IAEA is based. So it can get to the nitty-gritty of what can be agreed to. But of course, there are concerns at the same time that we are seeing even more military hardware coming in to this region. We are hearing from the State Department that non-essential personnel in the US Embassy in Jerusalem, for example, are authorized to leave. And we've also heard from that there was an email from the US Ambassador Mike Huckabee in Jerusalem saying to his staffers that if they do want to leave, that they should leave today. Also pointing out there's not a reason to panic, but they are making these decisions out of an abundance of caution. Also pointing out that there will be a high demand for flights out of Israel, so that they should just get a flight out of Israel and then onward travel to Washington. All of these elements play together to raise concerns, to raise tensions in the region, that military action could be imminent. But of course, there is only one man that knows whether or not that is going to be the case. We know that the US military has been briefing, the military leadership has been briefing the US president on exactly what the options are and the downsides of those options when it comes to potentially not being able to limit the scale or the intensity of an attack, and certainly not the scale of the retaliation, which Tehran has been very clear about. They have said that any strike would result in a wider regional war. So this is a region on edge this Friday evening, with little clarity really after those talks in Geneva yesterday.
Well, a third round of critical talks between the US and Iran now in the books as the two sides try to reach a nuclear deal amid a massive American military buildup in the Middle East. Iran says talks made progress and have moved into elements of an agreement. Oman's foreign minister says significant progress was made during negotiations today in Geneva, with technical discussions scheduled for next week. We have yet to hear, though, from the White House. Straight to Geneva and CNN's Fred Pleitgen. Do you expect them to be as positive about today, Fred?
Well, if what we're hearing from the other officials who are involved, that could very well be the case, that at least some progress was made. You just mentioned that we heard from the Iranian Foreign Minister, Max Abbas Araghchi, just a couple of minutes ago, saying that he believed that progress was made and that the outline of a deal was possibly coming together. One of the things that we have to know about the talks that took place today here is that they were a lot longer than the talks that we've seen, the first two rounds that we saw between the United States side and the Iranians over the past couple of weeks, those lasting, I would say, maybe 2 to 3 hours. These had two sessions that were 3 hours each, so a lot longer, and it seems as though the two sides delved a lot more into details and a possible text than they did before. But the Iranians already came to this meeting here with a proposal that they had formulated, something the United States asked them to do. The U.S. in the last meeting had said that there were certain red lines for them, and they wanted the Iranians to work out at least what a document could look like, and that seemed to be the basis of what was going on today. There are, of course, still a lot of things where the two sides still appear to be maybe not that far apart, but pretty far apart. The main thing, of course, is nuclear enrichment by the Iranians. It was an Iranian source with knowledge of the talks that told me the Iranians are continuing to insist on nuclear enrichment, saying that is a right that they have and not something that they're going to give up. The U.S., of course, wants zero enrichment, but it's unclear whether or not the Trump administration would be willing to settle for something along the lines of very little uranium enrichment possible for medical purposes and maybe other smaller purposes as far as research is concerned. And for the Iranian side, and this is something that an Iranian source told me as well, Max, for them sanctions relief is really something that's extremely important to sort out. They want major sanctions relief if they're going to make big concessions on their nuclear program. And they say that involves not only U.S. sanctions, but also United Nations Security Council sanctions as well. For the Iranian economy, obviously that would be very important. It's being strangled. And at the same time, of course, as you mentioned, that military buildup by the United States still going on in the Middle East, the Iranians saying that if they get attacked, they are going to hit back in a major way. So right now the tension is still there, and I think everybody who took part in these talks today and everybody who's observing these talks certainly waiting to see what President Trump's next words are going to be, whether or not he also assesses that these talks went in a positive manner. Max.
Stories, the nuclear talks in Geneva between the US and Iran. Sources tell CNN that President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, held direct talks with Iran's foreign minister. The latest round of negotiations have ended, but the two sides reportedly made significant progress and plan to continue talking next week. And whilst the Geneva negotiations are focused on avoiding a military fight inside Iran, the regime is trying to cover up what happened in its recent showdown with protesters. A CNN investigation finds that families of protesters killed in Iran's brutal crackdown are being pressured by authorities to lie about their loved ones' deaths. CNN's Jumana Karache has the story.
In grief, they dance, celebrating the life of those they've lost. This is how Iranians are defying their ruthless clerical regime, but one that has also been trying to bury the truth. Over the past few weeks, we've collected testimony pointing to a widespread effort by Iranian authorities to pressure families of its victims into silence and falsifying the circumstances of how those protesters were killed.
The family were visited by Basij paramilitary forces and Revolutionary Guards. They told the father he was talking too much because he had been saying that his son was shot in front of his eyes.
This man we're not identifying for his safety is in Iran. He spoke to us about his relatives, the Saidi family, whose member Emir Hussein was shot and killed by regime forces. He says security officials tried pressuring the family to label Emir Hussein a, quote, martyr, supporting the regime's narrative that so-called rioters backed by the US and Israel, not state forces, killed protesters.
The forces were present at their ceremonies. Basij members and others stayed nearby. They even went to their house and threatened them, saying, "We have to announce your child as a martyr, and you cannot speak anywhere. You must not say anything unless you want your other child's fate to be the same as this one."
Emir Hussein had never protested before the January uprising, but on that night, not even a medical condition he was struggling with could stop him.
He suddenly jumped up and down, saying, "Adrenaline has risen in my blood. I'm flying. Tonight, I want to fly."
Emir Hussein bled to death after being shot in the face by security forces, according to his relative. The 19-year-old and his dad were inseparable. On that night, he died in his father's arms. The Iranian regime has long been accused of harassing and intimidating families of protesters to silence them and coerce statements that align with the official account. This time, human rights groups tell us it is a systematic campaign that appears aimed at controlling the narrative and concealing the scale of state violence. Memorials like this one outside Iran allow the world to see the faces of some of the victims. Getting firsthand testimony from people inside the country is very hard. It is extremely dangerous to speak out against the regime. With the help of Iranian human rights groups and activists, we reviewed voice and text messages from more than a dozen families. They describe coercive tactics by the regime, including withholding protesters' bodies or burial permits. In some cases, relatives were pressured to attribute deaths to accidents. Many were harassed to accept the martyr designation. And we found that most were pushed to claim their loved ones were affiliated with state forces, bolstering state propaganda.
They said Sam's body would not be handed over until he was declared a Basiji and a martyr killed by terrorists.
They said his father either had to declare Abul Fazl as a Basiji or pay 6 billion riyals.
They openly threatened that if we said or did anything, other members of the family would suffer the same fate that Payman did.
They arrested his father and told him he had to say his son was martyred by the MEK opposition group or Israelis.
Authorities were forcing the family to call her a martyr or to say that she had been shot by terrorists.
Also declared a martyr was 3-year-old Melina Asadi. Her death weaponized by the regime, which falsely accused agents of Israel and the U.S. of killing the toddler. Like other families, they gather at their boy's grave, defying the theocratic regime. An act of protest against an oppressor trying to rewrite a blood-soaked history. Jumana Karachi, CNN.
The U.S. and Iran are said to be making significant progress in high-stakes nuclear discussions. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi says the two sides have begun discussing elements of an agreement. Now, that's according to Iranian media. Technical discussions will take place next week in Vienna. A source tells CNN U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff spoke directly with the Iranian foreign minister in Geneva. Normally, these discussions are held through mediators rather than those face-to-face talks. Now, it comes as President Trump weighs military action against Iran. The U.S. has deployed a large number of ships and aircraft to the Middle East, the largest military buildup in the region since the Iraq War. Kristen Holmes has been watching all of this from the White House for us. And Kristen, there were a few hot takes, right, in the last few hours on how negotiations were going, some good, some bad. I am curious to see what American officials are telling you this hour.
Yeah, well, look, here at the White House, I just spoke to them, I checked in, and they said that President Trump had not been briefed just yet on exactly what had happened in those talks because he's in back-to-back meetings since they concluded. But talking to U.S. officials, they did indicate that there was some progress made. Now, the U.S. officials that I have spoken to have been pretty careful because they've been down this path before. Of course, back in June, there were several rounds of these talks. They said that they were closer than ever to a deal, and then everything completely collapsed. So everyone is being somewhat hesitant as they are moving forward, but we do know that they are arranging for this discussions on the technical side of things to happen likely in the next week, which also indicates some sort of progress here. One source saying that Iran has affirmed that it will never have a nuclear weapon. And when I talk to sources that are close to the White House and close to President Trump, they really underline or underscore that President Trump doesn't really want to strike Iran, that when he says that he wants diplomacy to be his first choice, he really is leaning heavily into that. So that means that his officials on the ground, like Steve Witkoff and like Jared Kushner, are really, really trying to come out of this with some sort of deal because they understand how high the stakes are. I mean, I'll remind you that according to many of the people inside and around the White House and inside and around these talks, this was really seen as the last chance for diplomacy, and it does look as though they are extending this into the next week or so as they kind of continue to have these talks, which is a sign of progress, but nothing is ever done until, of course, as you know, is done.
And I hear you on the fact that the president would prefer the diplomatic option, and yet he also says that Iran cannot continue with any kind of nuclear program. Are you getting a sense that that is kind of his first stand and not his last stand, that there is some negotiation there?
I think that there's going to be some sort of wiggle room in the final product. Now, of course, President Trump has drawn these red lines before, but I do think, again, that ultimately, and this is from these people who are close to the president, they want to figure this out diplomatically, that they understand, and there is a lot of concerns with actually striking in Iran. We've been reporting that some of his top deputies, his top officials have warned him that there's no real easy way in and out, and this is likely to be something that's prolonged. And I just want to note, one thing we have not heard from the White House or the president is really a detailed reason as to what exactly he is looking for here and why now. Why are these strikes even on the table at this time? And should Americans be preparing for a prolonged war? You know, if you ask the White House, they point to his speech during the State of the Union and what he said, saying that detailed out, why he believes that this is important. I went back and read through that. It really does not give you a detailed outlook as to what his plan is there or how we got here or what he is expecting next. It just says what we already knew, which is that, Iran has been bad actors and they can't have a nuclear weapon. That's not anything new. So what now has triggered this in this moment, and how are they going to sell it to the American people? That we still don't have. As at the same time, I'm hearing from these officials that President Trump is not
anxious to go in immediately, and neither are his top advisors.
Yeah, and so many of those positions are likely to inform negotiations as those negotiators are at the table in Geneva. Kristen Holmes for us, grateful to you. Now, some Middle East analysts have been saying that Iran is likely offering the U.S. an economic and commercial bonanza as part of any deal. The Iranian economy could use some investment. Over the last year, Iran's currency lost 97% of its value versus the dollar. That's a collapse, by the way, and food prices continue to soar, up 72% in 2025. The situation sparked widespread protests last month. Adnan Mazarai was the deputy director of the IMF's Middle East and Central Asia Department. He's now a senior fellow with the Peterson Institute. And glad to have you here as we try and parse any kind of an outcome from these negotiations. You know, the fact that the Iranian economy is being strangled by sanctions, not new, but Iran is now at the negotiating table. Do you believe they must and that they will capitulate to U.S. demands on their nuclear program, maybe even their missile program, in exchange for those sanctions and some sanctions relief?
Good to be with you. Look, these negotiations, as you said, are happening against the background of sanctions, which have been tightened since President Trump came in at early 2025. These sanctions have been strengthened in two ways. One is to reduce Iran's ability to sell oil and other products, and to repatriate the funds of anything it does sell. A few days ago, the U.S. tightened its sanctions on Iran's shadow fleet. And again, in the background is also the president's threat to impose tariffs on any country that deals with trades with Iran. Now, Secretary Besson is confident that these sanctions that have been intensified this last year are a major reason that there was a public uprising. There has been a public uprising in the past couple of months. Okay, these uprisings have been a major challenge to the government, but they've been brutally suppressed thus far. The Iranians are interested in a deal, but on their own terms. They will not, for example, try to make any concessions on the missiles front. There's also a problem that there's a major credibility gap between the two parties. The U.S. doesn't think the Iranians will adhere to what they agree, and the Iranians similarly think that if they agree to something, the U.S. will turn around and ask for something else, not remove sanctions or even attack Iran. These economic offerings that Iran is making may be a substitute for a commitment device on the part of the U.S. to Iran that it will not attack. Mm-hmm. And it will also be seen by the Iranians as an incentive.
The point, though, about the economy, it is an existential threat to Iran now. You mentioned the protests. The economy is really strangling people there. The inflation is at unsustainable levels. I know everyone says that Iran will not give up missiles. They will not give up some of their nuclear program because it's existential. But at this point, isn't their economic problem existential as well?
The economic problem is existential. But one has to remember the first priority of this regime is survival. And compromising on the missile front, they may see as an attack on their survival. And at the same time, they have a high tolerance for pain on the part of the population. So they may just endure the sanctions further and not make any concessions beyond what they want to, which is perhaps suspension or of enrichment, and maybe something on the transfer of the already enriched stockpile.
You know, we are used to hearing that sanctions don't work in the short term, and they may not even work in the long term. Do you believe that these recent developments in Iran can challenge that theory?
The sanctions and the resulting public anger, which is not just because of sanctions, but is also against It's about the suppression of women. It is about the suppression of political freedoms, is having a major impact. As I said, the final decision on the part of the Iranian authorities is based on regime survival. They are under considerable pressure to do something. That's why they want to reach some agreement, but not if the agreement will undermine their continuation as a regime.
Adan, just hearing you in the last few minutes, we get an idea of just how difficult these negotiations will still be in the coming days and weeks. Grateful to you for your insights. Thanks so much.
Well, we're covering Iran as well, as I mentioned, and in Geneva, negotiators for the U.S. and Iran have wrapped up a third round of nuclear talks. The tone among some of them is optimistic. Iran's foreign minister says there is, quote, elements of an agreement on the table, adding that he expects a fourth round of talks soon.
Regarding a number of issues, we have come to close understanding. In some areas, we have some differences. Maybe more than in the past, we have seen more seriousness on both sides to reach a negotiated settlement.
Those comments come as the U.S. continues to ramp up its military presence in the Middle East, an apparent attempt to, well, either prepare for military action or try to force Iran into a deal. Joining me now, NATO's former Supreme Allied Commander, retired U.S. Admiral James Stavridis. Good to have you back, sir. Thanks for joining.
Good to see you, Jim.
So I know in a piece that you wrote for Bloomberg, you outlined three options: non-kinetic warfare, limited military strikes, and a longer-term campaign. I don't want to ask you to look at a crystal ball because, you know, all of our crystal balls failed. But based on the indicators you're seeing now, which outcome do you think is most likely?
I'm going to go with door number two. So limited strikes. I think when I hear the participants in today's talks in Geneva, it sounds a lot to me like no real progress. Both sides go back and reassess. A lot will depend on how Donald Trump reacts to the briefing he gets from Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. I don't think he'll react well. I think he will correctly assess that the Iranians are just kind of tapping him along. And he will, in my view, 70% chance, so 2 in 3, launch limited strikes. As I outlined in the Bloomberg piece, the strikes will probably go after what's left of the Iranian nuclear program, the ballistic missile program. I hope some of them target the ability of Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz. Look for that maybe over the weekend, 70% chance. I'll close with this, Jim. Let's always close on a positive note. I think there's still a 30% chance, a 1 in 3 chance that the parties come back to the table for another set of conversations. But the time is growing quite short for Tehran.
Did I hear you clearly that you think it's likely to happen this weekend?
Yeah, if President Trump gets a brief tomorrow and they say to him, hey, this isn't going well, they're just kind of stringing us along.
Right.
I think it'll be midnight hammer 2, meaning a repeat of the strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities back in June. So I don't wish for that, Jim, but I think 70% chance we're headed toward a strike in the next 7 days.
The president seems to believe that he can carry out a limited strike and therefore limit the risks of that, right, and potential retaliation by Iran. Do you think that that is a plausible assumption, or do you fear, as you look at this, that Iran might try to expand this if it were to retaliate?
Boy, you've put your finger on the absolutely right question, and I can answer that in 3 words. I don't know.
Yeah.
Nobody knows, not you, not Tehran, not Washington. This gets very unpredictable very quickly. Again, better than even chance, I would say. If the president decides to strike, if it is relatively limited, I think there's at least a chance Tehran would come back to the table. if Tehran really hunkers down or responds in a serious way, say they close the Strait of Hormuz, they go after U.S. diplomats in the Middle East, or worse yet, U.S. civilians, business people in the Middle East. If they launch ballistic missiles and hit targets in Israel, then it's a technical term here, Katie bar the door. I think at that point, the Trump administration will respond with a very significant series of strikes. 2 to 3 weeks, we could be off to the races in the Middle East. Let's hope not.
From a force posture perspective, you've got an enormous force and strain on that force. I mean, particularly one of the carrier strike groups, it's had to delay leave for a long time. If you do limited strikes and kind of wait to see what Iran does afterwards, I mean, the question is, how long can you keep a force of this size in place to keep your options open?
There's 2 answers to the question. One is, if you really, really want to, you could continue to rotate forces. You could send another carrier over to relieve the 2 that are on station. What I'm more concerned about in a long campaign is less the ships and the people, it's the weapons. How many of the precision-guided bombs, how many of the missiles do we have? We've depleted a lot in the last year. That would be concerning. So watch the ammunition as opposed to the ships and the people. But I want to make one final point. It's an important one, Jim. You and I have often discussed. It's the stress and the strain on the people who are forward deployed. That carrier, for example, has been now deployed. This is the Ford since the 1st of May of last year. I'd invite any listener to think, what did you do on Memorial Day, 4th of July, Labor Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's? That ship's been out there. And unless something changes dramatically, they're looking at least a 1-year deployment. That's a tough pull at the oar.
Yeah, it's a lot. Final question, if I can, because you're a strategic thinker. Is it clear to you what the strategic goal is here? Because we've heard everything from kill the nuclear program right up to remove the leadership. I mean, is it clear to you?
No, I think there are four objectives on the table. You mentioned 2 of them. The other 2 would be to take out the ballistic missile program, take out what's left of the Iranian nuclear program. You want to take out the leadership, that's been mentioned, and you want to support the protesters, which is kind of tied to the 3rd one. Point being, it's a pretty rich stew that you're trying to make on top of the oven here. It's not clear what your principal objective is. Sometimes in the military, Jim, we say, when you attack everywhere, you attack nowhere. I would say for the administration, get focused, decide what you want to accomplish here, put the forces in play to go after it. I've yet to see that plan.
Says Iran is expected to submit proposals regarding its nuclear activities to Omani mediators. It comes ahead of a meeting between US and Iranian officials in Geneva on Thursday following talks last week. We're being told that in response to the latest American demands, Tehran may offer to put limits on its uranium enrichment. And as the US weighs potential attacks on Iran, President Trump said in a Truth Social post Monday his military leaders think the US would easily win any war with Iran. Iranian state TV is reporting that the Revolutionary Guard Corps conducted military drills on Iran's southern coast today. Let's bring in Paula Hancock from Abu Dhabi, who's been tracking this. So, Paula, what are your sources telling you about this updated proposal?
Well, Christina, it is clear that the next couple of days are key when it comes to what is happening between the United States and Iran. You have those talks coming up in Geneva between the 2 sides on Thursday. And we understand from a source close to this matter that there is expected to be an update from the Iranian officials. We hear from a source that they were expected at some point today to be updating Omani mediators, talking about a response to the talks that have already taken place between the US and Iran. Within that proposal, that not a new plan, but a revised response, there was expected to be the insistence once again that Iran has the right to enrich uranium. This is something we've heard just a couple of days ago from Iran's foreign minister as well, saying that it is a matter of pride and dignity for Iranians. We are hearing, though, from this source that this plan could show compromise when it comes to limiting the enrichment of uranium. Now, we have heard from US President Donald Trump. He doesn't want any enrichment of uranium. So potentially there is still a gap between the two sides. But we did hear from Iranian officials telling Reuters that potentially the highly enriched uranium that is believed to still be in country, potentially Iran could export part of that. They could dilute another part of that as part of this compromise. We heard from the UN just last year that they believe there's some 440 kilograms of this highly enriched uranium, one of the key sticking points when it comes to these discussions. We have consistently, though, been hearing from Iran that they only want to talk about the nuclear program, and that they do also want to be talking about potential lifting of sanctions and economic relief. So really what we are going to see over the next couple of days could show us exactly what is going to be happening when it comes to this issue. We heard from one source familiar, one regional source, quote, "This Thursday will decide everything, a war or a deal," those crucial talks that will be taking place in Geneva.
Student protests have erupted in Iran as Tehran faces mounting pressure from the US to curb its nuclear program. Well, protesters held a weekend march at a university campus in Iran's capital in honor of students and others killed during last month's anti-government protests. At the same time, Iranian and US officials say they expect a third round of talks will take place in Geneva on Thursday. Iran's foreign minister says he's optimistic a diplomatic solution can be reached on Tehran's nuclear program. We've got CNN's Paula Hancock's following developments for us here in Abu Dhabi. Good to see you. So what is happening? What is the latest in terms of the protest action? We saw some of those images there.
So, Eleni, this was taking place over the weekend, and it was basically a case of the start of the semester coinciding with the end of the mourning period, this 40-day period. We understand that there have been further protests at this point. We haven't heard anything about a crackdown. We have been seeing, and you can see in some of those pictures, clashes between the pro-regime elements and anti-regime elements. So that appears to be different protest groups that are clashing as we understand it at this point. We did hear from one professor saying that they had given permission for some of these protests to take place, despite what has happened over the past 2 months, because they were respecting the mourning period. These are students, in some cases, that are mourning their friends, their loved ones that were killed by security forces at the beginning of this year, in the first month of this year. So it is interesting that we are seeing these protests spark once again. At this point, we are not seeing security forces intervening. But of course, you know, the information is not coming out as freely as it does from other countries.
I mean, as we see these images and these protests on the go, consequential possible, meeting in Geneva later on this week. In terms of what the Iranians anticipate, what the US wants, give me a sense of where these discussions are headed.
So the Iranian officials that are speaking publicly, and they have been speaking publicly, in particular the foreign minister over the weekend, speaking to US media in particular, is that this is positive. This is possible, obviously, with that sheer amount of US military arsenal on its doorstep. It is trying to push the narrative that this is possible. First of all, let's listen to what the Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said to CBS over the weekend.
And I believe that when we meet, probably this Thursday in Geneva again, we can work on those elements and prepare a good text and come to a fast deal. This is my understanding. I see it quite possible.
Now, Arakchi had also said that there would be a counter-proposal, that he would come back with something within days. That was last week. We're expecting that imminently, certainly in the early part of this week. We also know that an Iranian official told Reuters that they believe, when it comes to this highly enriched uranium, of course, that is the key point, that they potentially, Tehran would entertain the idea of a combination of exporting some of that highly enriched uranium and then diluting part of it as well. So suggesting that they do believe a compromise can be found, although, of course, we have heard from the US president that he doesn't want any enrichment whatsoever. So there is still significant gaps.
There's definitely a sticking point on whether Iran can and should enrich uranium. And it's interesting what the Iranians are bringing to the table. The question is how open the United States is going to be. What are the kind of proposals that are being floating around right now on that?
So what we've heard is effectively from this Iranian official, and they are addressing the highly enriched uranium, knowing that that is going to be the sticking point. They are obviously being very focused on just the nuclear program. They don't want this discussion to go any further. They don't want to be talking about their ballistic missile program. They don't want to be talking about their proxies in the region, which is what we know that Washington was keen to broaden these talks out to. So this is really what we're focusing on, or what the Iranian officials appear to be focusing on, the fact that they could suggest this compromise, but at the same time what they want is to have an acknowledgement that they have the right to enrich uranium. They're not willing, at least from what they've said publicly, to give up on that right. And as I say, President Trump's been very clear that he doesn't.
All right, let's get some expert analysis in just a short while. But first, Iranian and U.S. officials, they say that they expect a third round of talks will take place in Geneva on Thursday. Iran's foreign minister says that he's optimistic that a diplomatic solution will be reached on Tehran's nuclear program.
And I believe that when we meet, probably this Thursday in Geneva again, we can work on those elements and prepare a good text and come to a fast deal. This is my understanding. I see it quite possible.
All right, to that expert analysis now. Intrita Parsi is an executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He's also the author of Losing an Enemy, Obama, Iran, and the Triumph of Diplomacy. Trita, thank you so much. Welcome back to CNN.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
And it's great to have you with us. There are new talks between the U.S. and Iran that are apparently set for Thursday. Iran pretty much has been slow to make a new offer. Why do you think that is?
I don't think they have been that slow to make an offer. In fact, the only offers that have really been made has come from the Iranian side. The U.S. offer, so to say, is exactly what Witkoff said in that interview. It's a demand for capitulation. And I fear that Trump's understanding of where Iran is a little bit off, to be frank with you. I think he has an exaggerated view of how much Iran has been weakened over the course of the last 2 years. It absolutely has been weakened, but not to the extent that Trump thinks. And this has led him to make maximalist demands, essentially expect Iranian surrender. And now he is surprised as to why they're not surrendering. Well, the reason is they're not as weak as Trump thinks they are. And as a result, we need a much more realistic approach in order to be able to get to a deal, rather than thinking that just simply demanding their surrender eventually will lead to results.
In terms of a shall we call it this roadmap towards diplomacy, Trita, let me tap into your expert mind here. I mean, what are the sort of ingredients of an ideal sort of negotiation, especially when it comes to not only to nuclear enrichment, but also the state of sanctions and the timing of all of this?
So there's many different ways you can go about this. The way the Obama administration did is that they started slowly and they had an interim deal. They built some confidence between the two sides. And then there was an agreement that was reciprocal. The Iranians would take certain steps on curbing their nuclear program, and sanctions would be slowly but surely lifted. And eventually, if the deal had been in place for 10 years, there would have been significant steps that would have been taken by the two sides. But because Trump pulled out of it, of course, that process stopped. Trump doesn't seem to like that approach because it is taking too long. He wants a fast deal, just a couple of bullet points, a couple of principles, and then they can work out the details afterwards. That's usually not the way the Iranians operate, but it seems to me that the Iranians are now adjusting to the manner that Trump is used to making deals. But again, none of this will work if both sides have completely unrealistic expectations of what they can get out of this negotiation.
And no clear sort of laid out goal too. And when you look at the exactly where both countries stand, do you think that they both essentially have initiative to let things further escalate? I mean, would it be in their interest to not follow the road to diplomacy?
I think it will be an absolutely lose-lose situation if this escalates into war. It will be clearly a lose situation for the Iranians. The US's military power, of course, is overwhelming. But it will also be a lose situation for the United States because the Iranians still have significant capability of inflicting damage on the US, on the oil markets, on regional stability, as well as US soft targets throughout the region and perhaps beyond. There's nothing good that will come out of this. I think it also will be a lose situation for the Iranian people who, as you pointed out, are still out there protesting. They're still angry, and as they should be, about the killings that have taken place there by the brutality of the Iranian government over the course of the last couple of weeks, but also over the course of the last couple of years and decades. Nothing good will come out of that. So it's crucial that there is a de-escalation. And there's one card the Iranians have not played yet, which I think is a mistake. They should be open to talking directly to Trump himself, not just to his negotiators. This needs much bigger efforts at de-escalation. And the Iranians have, in my view, very foolishly rejected that opportunity, that pathway. And I think Trump would have, I don't think we would have seen the escalation we have seen thus far had the Iranians agreed to do this much earlier.
Tonight, Iran's foreign minister responding on X, writing, it is, quote, curious as to why we do not capitulate because we are Iranian. We're joined now by former State Department Middle East negotiator Aaron David Miller. He's now a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Aaron, thanks for being here. This is a very interesting time in all of this, the next several days. Many administrations, Democratic and Republican, have tried diplomacy with Iran. How are you reading where we stand tonight?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jess. Look, there are no good options with Iran. There are no good negotiating options. The president is not going to get what he wants. The Iranians are not going to break with their proxies, fundamentally restrict their ballistic missiles, or give up completely the right to enrich, not with this brutal, repressive regime. And there are no good military options. And I think the president's frustration reflects the fact that we're on the cusp of what could be a major regional war, and we seem to be sleepwalking into it without a clear set of objectives of what it is we want to achieve. And that's risky business, right? I mean, if you don't define what it is you want, and obviously the first shot, the enemy has a vote, wars evolve, strategies change. But if you don't define your objectives, then reality defines them for you. And frankly, we've had no presentation by the administration of exactly what it intends to do. What are the costs? What are the risks? And I think the president is toggling. One day we're going to, We're going to basically hit them so they come to the negotiating table. And in the months to come, we're going to hit them harder. I mean, that's just not a strategy. It's frustrating, I understand, because this regime, frankly, it's almost impossible for America, for the United States to get what it wants, either at the negotiating table or on the battlefield.
Yeah. And how much do you think the current situation, what's evolved and happened over the last 2 years, and the severe weakening of Iran and its proxies, how does that factor into this on both sides?
I mean, in a way, you would argue. I mean, Steve Witkoff talks about capitulation, and when have the Iranians ever capitulated? Even the Iranian nuclear agreement came at a cost. We conceded the right for the Iranians to enrich uranium on Iranian soil. So the Iranians don't capitulate. 40 plus years since the revolution should suggest that is in fact the case. And frankly, I really don't know where the administration is going. The weakness implies that the Iranians are vulnerable and they should be willing to cut some sort of deal on terms that the administration could accept. But the weakness argument plays the other way too. The Iranians are desperate, could be desperate, and if they see this as an existential sort of struggle, they're going to respond. And that, I guess, Judge, that's the other thing. What do they do in the event that the administration hits them hard or relatively not hard at all? There's strikes against the Israelis, there's strikes against economic infrastructure in Saudi Arabia, or strikes against American forces at our bases in the Gulf. So again, risky business without a clear end state, I think, articulated as of yet on the part of the administration.
Yeah, and that was kind of something we were discussing with a guest earlier in the show, which is, okay, if you do a limited strike and that still doesn't get them to where you want them to be, you being the Trump administration, then is your hand now forced with this massive military buildup to go in hard? You know, are you now kind of backed into a corner to have to go in harder?
I mean, I listened to Wes Clark describe the hardware earlier. That we've deployed. It's clearly the largest demonstration deployment of American air power since the Iraq War. I mean, but the reality is, if that is in fact the case, then what are the metrics for success? Is the objective to back up the president's words that help is on the way, we're going to hit them hard? Is it to fracture the regime? Is it to drop special ops guys on the ground in an effort to undermine their ballistic missile production or their nuclear sites? Is there an option on the table to identify where the senior leadership is, where an 86-year-old supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, is, and to what? Do a Maduro? Again, if you don't define the objectives, then others define them for you, or reality defines them for you. If we want to change the regime, I think there's a way to do it, but it's completely unrealistic. It's Iraq. You want to deploy hundreds of thousands of American forces, occupy a country of roughly 90 million people, and hope you could somehow manufacture and orchestrate a different regime. And even if the regime fractured, and again, I'll say it again, a brutal, repressive regime whose time has clearly come. Look at the Iranian public, and as the death toll mounts from the first week in January, the question is, how do you effectively either negotiate, if that's what the president wants to do, or use military force to undermine the regime, to weaken it over time? Again, I don't think there's a clear set of objectives here.
It's about, you and to a person, everyone says it's about defining your objectives, knowing what you're trying to accomplish. Aaron, Iran's foreign minister says further nuclear talks with the U.S. could happen as soon as Thursday. On the U.S. side, those talks are being led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. And today, he said President Trump was, in his words, curious as to why Iran had not, quote, capitulated to military pressure. Over the last several weeks, the U.S. has amassed the largest buildup of American forces in the Middle East since the Iraq War. And we're joined now by former NATO Supreme Allied Commander General Wesley Clark. General Clark, great to have you here on this Sunday evening. We have this massive buildup of forces at the ready while these diplomatic talks continue, but their scope kind of remains exactly unclear. Where do you see this all going?
I see us possibly doing a limited strike early in the week, depending on how we're looking at the potential negotiations that might occur on Thursday. And the idea would be a strike, pause, wait for negotiations, put more pressure on, strike again, and see if we can't squeeze the Iranian regime into concessions that go beyond the 2015 agreement that President Obama got. And as you know, the American position is we want a halt to the nuclear processing. We want, or enrichment. We want a halt to the ballistic developments that could threaten the region, and we want an end to the axis of resistance that's out there. Those are three big asks of the Iranians, and if they were all conceded to, Iran would be stripped of what it considers its defense and deterrence. So this is a big ask, and Iran may see itself as actually being in a stronger position. It may believe that it can see, like a turtle, pull its head in, get in the shell, wait for the inevitable attacks, wait them out. I know they're watching very closely the U.S. political system. They know what MAGA believes and what they said after the last strikes in June. So we have a really complicated situation here, Jessica.
Yeah, and so to that end, does it then put force the president, again, you've got all of this military buildup there. If, let's say, that option is used, which is this more targeted military strike to try to get the Iranians to agree to what the president and his administration are asking for. If they don't do that, would it then potentially force the president to continue with military action?
I think that's what the Iranians are hoping for. I think they're hoping that they can absorb the first strike, absorb the second strike, not give up much, and that the United States will eventually just run out of energy or run out of political will to continue the strikes. I think they're making a mistake in that because so many of us believe that Iran having a nuclear weapon is really an existential threat, not only to Israel, but to the region and ultimately to the United States. So I think the Iranian leadership may be misunderstanding the broader support for this action in the United States.
And we've used some superlatives trying to explain to people how large this military buildup is. But can you help contextualize what we're seeing based on your experience?
Well, it's a full scramble, and so you have the two aircraft carriers. So you have off those aircraft carriers, maybe 180 aircraft. Then you have several other squadrons of fighters. You have the availability of the B-2s that can deploy. We had 7 that deployed in June. We could put more B-2s in there at this point. You have the tanker fleet there to support them. You have airborne command and control and the AWACS system to support continuous presence.